A recording has started.
Good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton. It's January 12th, 2022, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the Board of Finance Capital Planning Workshop taking place via WebEx. I'll call the meeting to order and ask everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Before we kick off tonight's workshop, I first want to acknowledge the other elected officials who've joined our board this evening, including the Board of Selectmen and representatives from the Board of Education and the RTM. Thank you all for being here to participate in this important process. To the members of the public who are listening in, this meeting is a workshop format to talk about capital needs and planning. We are not voting on anything tonight, and we will not plan to take live public comment during the meeting. But you are encouraged to send comments during or after the meeting to the following email, bof@fairfieldct.org. Please remember to include your name and address in your email as you would during live comment. I do want to acknowledge those residents who've already taken the time in advance of this meeting to write in. Your input is valuable and it's appreciated. And you should also know that there will be an opportunity for public comment on the capital projects that are proposed, and we'll provide that opportunity in future meetings when the individual projects come back before this board for a vote. Also, for the benefit of the public, just a quick overview of the objectives of this workshop and what we hope to accomplish. This is part of the annual capital planning process where the town administration, Education Central Office, and Wpca lay out their 10-year plans for annual capital spending requirements. And the town takes us through the impact of that proposed spending on future bonding and debt service requirements. One of the key objectives for our board is to understand how that proposed future bonding fits in to the policies we've established around debt service limits and into the guidance we get from our external financial advisors. Managing our debt limits thoughtfully and intentionally has always been a key focus for this board. It helps our town protect its AAA credit rating, but just as importantly, it protects our annual budget by allowing us to avoid unnecessary volatility and avoid scenarios where debt service costs crowd out other important spending priorities. Aside from our focus on the overall plan, and its impact on future debt service, we will hear about and have the opportunity to ask questions about specific projects that have been proposed, how they've been prioritized, and the basis for how costs were estimated. But as I said before, we're not voting on anything tonight, and the intent is not to take deep dives into each project. We'll have the opportunity to do that when those projects come back before us for approval. So with that said, I'd like to move through the discussion items tonight in the following order. First, Ms. Kupchak will take us through a presentation. Ms. Kupchak and her team will take us through a presentation on the capital planning process that was undertaken by the town, the overall plan and the key takeaways, as well as a summary of proposed capital spending by the town, focusing on the upcoming year. We'll then open that up for Q&A on the process and for questions on the town side of spending. And after we do that, Board of Ed representatives will provide an overview of their capital plan, focusing on their process, the large projects, and what's changed since last year. And we'll open it up again at that point for Q&A. So given the order of the presentations, I'll just ask in advance that we reserve our questions until the appropriate time after the presenters have had an opportunity to walk us through their materials. So for example, even though the overall plan for the town presented by the first selectwoman will include Board of Ed spending, if we have questions on Board of Ed projects, I'm going to just ask that we please hold those until after the Board of Ed reps have a chance to give us their overview. And just one other reminder, especially since we have more participants than usual in this meeting, please raise your hand if you want to speak and wait to be recognized. I will do my best to navigate the boxes on the screen so everyone has an opportunity to have their questions answered. I personally prefer not to use the chat box unless it becomes necessary. I kind of find it distracting and it's difficult to pay attention to the presenters and moderate at the same time. So again, please just raise your hand if you want to speak. And, if that starts not to work, if you don't get recognized, by all means, you can note in the chat box that you have a question. But just to be clear, that's to be used by meeting participants, and it's not a forum for public comment during the meeting. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, I will turn this then over to the town and the first select woman to kick us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. I want to echo the chairwoman's comments, thanking our residents who have reached out to us regarding the needs, and I appreciate that you spelled out that process, that this is a workshop, and as projects are introduced to the town bodies is when people should be advocating is the best time, use of their time to advocate for specific projects. Obviously, our town has many needs, and we have to balance those needs in a responsible way. I just want to thank our CFO, Jared Schmidt, and my Chief of Staff, Jackie Bertalone, for all their efforts that they put in to putting together all the backup and also the PowerPoint presentation that you'll be seeing this evening. I'm going to have, we're going to start sharing that with the screen. We had a little technical difficulties tonight when we came into the room. Okay. So as the chairwoman said, the purpose of our workshop is to provide a comprehensive list and needs assessment for all projects worthy of consideration by the town. In prior years, the list was cut down before being presented to the board. And this proposed is for capital funding, to also present a plan for capital funding for next year and to discuss the priorities of the town and produce a guide for future funding. Provide financial estimates and a benchmark in terms of yearly bonding capacity in order to balance the needs of the town, the Board of Ed, and the town's long-standing financial position and our AAA bond rating. Identify sources of funding for all capital projects and provide an update on the status of our FY22 projects. The process, the administration will present a prioritized list of identifiable capital needs for the town of Fairfield. There, as Chairwoman said, there will be no votes taken at the capital workshop. The administration will place a detailed list of non-reoccurring capital projects, less than $1 million, on the agenda for the Board of Selectmen. And I'm sorry, is there a problem? Oh, okay. Yeah, give it to me. I'm sorry, Lori. I'm sorry, let me go back. We will, as I said, place a list of non-recurring capital projects less than $1 million on the agenda for the Board of Selectmen, which the Board of Finance and RTM will also consider for approval. Capital projects greater than $1 million will be presented by the administration throughout the year as projects are deemed ready for approval. Bonding cap. The following presentation includes all projects the town and Board of Ed have identified. The town, Wpca, and Board of Education have competing needs and together exceed the threshold. The administration does not recommend bonding at these levels, as it could harm the town's bond rating and financial stability. To comply with the Board of Finance debt service policy, annual borrowing is capped at approximately $37.5 million in order to stay under the 8.45% debt service limit. In this slide, Jared put together the chart below is an update to last year's capacity analysis. Or was this? So Matt Spurndle, our financial advisor to the town, put this together. Jared asked him for this meeting. And you can see it's an update on last year's capacity analysis to maintain debt service to the budget level below 8.45. And obviously Jared can answer some questions at the end after the presentation regarding any of those items. Near to midterm execution challenges. So we're dealing with equipment and material supply chains issues impacting progress on current projects, as we're all aware of. We read the news and watch the news. Ordering products, equipment are slow in arriving. New orders not allowed till 2023 on vehicle orders. And there's a short supply of microchips, and that's a broad impact on our abilities. Steady rise in inflation and increased costs. Nationwide deluge of public sector capital funding, as we've seen with ARPA. All these towns are, running around trying to spend their ARPA funding. Internal resources at capacity and increased demand for labor. Fairfield's rates are, though, lower than surrounding communities. WPCA capital needs. The overall capital needs of the WPCA have not changed significantly since last year. However, there will be a commitment to identifying and beginning to address major I&I issues before pursuing a large-scale upgrade to the main facility. And Bucky can speak more closely to that after the presentation about what that means exactly. Our capital needs, town capital needs. With the exception of 2022, the town capital needs increase each year. In general, increase as a result of additional needs, life safety upgrades to town buildings, which we spent money on that assessment so we could have that road, that improvement, so we could know about this. Roadway capital improvement plan. We all wanted to have that plan, a review of our roads by experts, so we knew exactly what we needed and how we should lay it out. Fill pile remediation, proposed town hall campus improvements, and a proposal for a new senior center. The Board of Education capital needs, they presented, and they were going to obviously speak. If we just laid out the current plan, the capital needs assessment, and then the increase. The capital needs in total, with the exception, you're looking at this chart reflects the annual combined capital needs assessment of the town, water pollution control, and Board of Ed. So the total assessment represents a 98% increase over the current plans. Comparison of capital needs there, they laid out the Board of Ed, what they currently were, and then going down, it's 183% increase. The town is an 80%. WPCA is roughly the same as what we've had presented in the past. And then we've got the total of 98%. Impact of all projects. The chart below is for illustrative purposes only. It clearly shows why we cannot really afford all of these projects, and we would quickly exceed our bonding capacity. We are definitely not proposing to do all of these projects over a 10-year period, but rather really wanted to make sure that all town bodies knew of all identified projects that the town has. So we had a full scope and understanding of the needs. So our ARPA projects, in total, our capital accounts are more than $15 million of ARPA funding. Below is just a review of already approved projects that we all went through the process with, and as we are aware of, and I know that Jared sent out some backup earlier where you could see the ones that were they're in gray, the ones that are already approved and ARPA funded. Fill pile implications. Obviously none of us want to have to deal with this, but it's here. And so we have these estimates as placeholders, and as I've spoken about in the past, these are estimates. As you know, we will be doing the presentation next week with our environmental attorney to go through all the fill pile information and where we are and where we think we might be heading for the town boards. I know it's been frustrating for people. It sure as hell is frustrating for us as well, that we don't have any hard information, and we will be able to present more information so that the boards, the current elected officials understand what we've been looking at. Department of Public Works. Under my administration and our new DPW leadership, we have spent this last year compiling information, which I think has been very helpful. And it's resulted in a 10-year vehicle replacement program, facility needs assessment of life and safety issues in all our town buildings, 10-year roadway management program, which we have never had, and we now have a comprehensive forecast to present and future expenditures to our elected officials. So we have a nice blueprint on those areas. Proposed 22 through 26 road capital improvement plan. So as we did during the paving presentation, we all agreed and paid for this expert to come in and assess all of our roads and to give us a full paving plan of where we are and where we should be going and how it would be laid out. And I think it's extraordinarily helpful for us to know about it. And the way we've laid it out here is based on that plan. So the total would be, we are assuming for the first 2 years, 23 and 24, based on the paving plan, which they said we would need to get up to where we need, $4 million and then 3.7. Now the other sources item, that's the ARPA money. That's $1.25 million each of those 2 years, those 2 fiscal years. And we're assuming $1 million of operating paving in the budget to supplant that. And then if you look at it as it goes out after that, in the paving plan, if you recall, they said at 2028, we would be leveling off to the point where we would only need $2 million a year to maintain the roads in a high level of service for our community. Town building capital needs assessment. Last year's capital improvement plan included funding for the audit of town buildings to identify code compliances, accessibility, ADA, and any ongoing future capital and life safety issues. These are just a small sample of those consultants' recommendations: the boilers, eroding domestic water piping, installing emergency lighting on doorways, adding additional fire alarm, audio-visual devices, remove and replace kitchenette sinks to make them ADA compliant. The projects do not include expansions or large-scale renovations or any energy efficiency initiatives. It's just a bare bones, how do we get our buildings up to compliance as far as safety and ADA. FY23 non-reoccurring capital plan. These are the projects that that we've identified for non-reoccurring list. As you can see, these are important infrastructure issues: Pine Creek, Tide Gate, the Riverside Tide Gate, sidewalk repairs, the deck and patio behind the senior center. Some of these were in the ARPA, underwater bridge inspection, resiliency, AC open space at the Jennings Beach design, fire station, self-contained breathing apparatus, and so on and so forth. FY23 town capital, including non-reoccurring. This is just a pie chart that Jackie and Jared put together to give everyone a sense of how it's broken out. You know, obviously the fill pile is, sitting there. It's a quite big piece of that pie. And then you have about $4 million in Pavilion, so that's a significant piece to the pie. And then we have our non-reoccurring, our railroad bridge tide gates, and the roadway capital improvement, facilities upgrades, and then capital equipment. Capital plan including the non-reoccurring, the FY23, and you can all look at those lists. These are lists that we've we've talked about. Most of these are important projects, infrastructure issues, quality of life too, as well, and safety. The FY23 capital plan, so we broke it out. Proposed by the Board of Education is 15,830. And by the town, I wanted to break it out because, that fill pile and pavilion is, 10,615,000 proposed, obviously it's an estimate. And then proposed by the town without that issue that we're dealing with is 13,272. And then the WPCA is 4,275,000. So, this is a prioritized list. Starting last year, we wanted to take, do you want to close that out, Chair? So starting last year, we decided to take a different approach to the capital workshop. Our goal was to identify all the capital projects and present them to boards to increase transparency related to the capital needs of our town. I know that the prior administrations took a different approach and pulling off projects they didn't want the other boards to consider. But I believe it's important that all our elected officials and our town's taxpayers understand the full scope of all our projects. In the presentation, you notice that the total dollar amount of all of those projects were significantly greater than they have been in previous years. And this was largely due to the proposed projects from our public schools, including air conditioning and the proposal of a construction of a new school. To be fair, the town also has included all known projects, and many of these projects have been either neglected in the past or tied to the fill pile remediation, life safety issues to our town buildings, and unfortunately the Pavilion reconstruction. Without the cost of the fill pile in the town, we would have far more room in the next 3 years to do other things. And of course, I know that's frustrating to all of us. During the last year's workshop, we also worked with our financial advisor to set up benchmarks for the town's capacity to bond money while keeping our debt payments at a reasonable level. Despite the substantial need that you see in the presentation, we continue to be committed to keeping our debt service close to 8.5% of all spending over the long term. And this is going to require stretching the limited tax dollars that we have, closely monitoring all contractor work, seeking more opportunities for grants and other private partnerships, delaying less critical projects. In addition to financial constraints, we will continue to deal with other operational challenges. Some of these are out of our control, and others can be addressed with your help. Supply chain issues, as I said earlier, are often unpredictable with our material and our equipment. For example, our normal passenger vehicle vendor is not accepting any new orders till 2023. While we welcome the additional federal funding that we have received, the influx of federal money into the state has put a strain on all the networks, on labor and consultants, and frankly, it's putting a strain on our own departments, especially our engineering and purchasing departments. All of these factors make it challenging to put together a reliable short-term capital plan, and even more difficult to predict what will happen the next 5 to 10 years from now. The list of projects will need to be updated each year, and as has been done in the past. We have provided a plan for the next year's capital projects, FY23, and as past years, we will present details of each of those capital non-reoccurring projects for your approval within the next month or so. And the capital projects, as I said earlier, will be presented throughout the year when they are ready. Going through this exercise with department heads and our finance department, I feel we could improve this process going forward. I would like to assemble a bipartisan working group with representations from the town bodies to take a deeper dive into the projects and assemble a 5-year plan that we can fully understand and have confidence in. And that is it. I will hand it over to you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you putting together this presentation. It was very helpful. Before I open it up to the board for questions, are you planning, or you or the team planning to walk through any of the other backup schedules that were provided, or do you want to just reserve that for Q&A?
I mean, that's up to you, Lori. If you would like to have Q&A, I'm sure Jared can come up and answer any questions based on backup.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you didn't want to walk through anything else. Again, the presentation was helpful.
No, thank you, though.
All right, and we're very appreciative of that. So, questions from the board? Any hands? Mr. Curley.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Selectwoman, thank you for the presentation. I thought that was excellent. I really appreciate that the comprehensive detail that you and your team put together. I also appreciate the change in strategy to share all of the projects and provide a comprehensive list, and then to prioritize from there. I appreciate that. That really does make a difference, and it's a big help. So thank you. I know we're going to get an update on the fill pile in a little bit more detail next week, so I'm not looking to get into too much detail on that. But I did want to ask about the fill pile in Penfield, whether you were comfortable with the timing and that the spend that you've suggested would occur in this upcoming fiscal year, as it's been laid out in the schedules, or if you think there's a chance that that might slip as well, and we may not need to bond as much in the upcoming year.
So thank you. That's a good question, and we agonized over that because, as I've said, we don't know when we're going to. We planned and have cut off events at Penfield Pavilion starting October of next year. So we're going to go through our 2022, and then at the end of October, we stopped taking any more, and we made that decision several months ago because we were hoping that we'd have some sign-off from the regulating agencies on what we can do with our cleanup. But again, we don't know that. We're hoping. We're hoping that we could start putting, the hope is we have a plan from them, they sign off, we put a shovel in the ground in November or December of 2022, and then have something at least have it all cleaned up so it's not impacting our beach time for our residents. But again, we don't know that. So yes, it could potentially go to the next fiscal year. We just don't know yet.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I had a couple of follow-ups as well, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Regarding the paving, I know that I also applaud the effort to put together the the roadway management program that was presented to the multiple boards a few weeks ago or last month. And I think coming out of that presentation, there were some follow-up questions that were asked, and I guess my question relates to whether we were going to get an update or a follow-up presentation on that program, because one of the questions I had posed at the time was that over the next 5 years, what was discussed was roughly $3.5 million per year for 5 years, and that would cover roughly 55 miles of roadway out of 272. And to me, it seemed at the time that that would be pretty much a run rate. And I know that the dollars that were suggested after the 5 years time horizon did trail off in the presentation, but without getting into more color or detail about that, I kind of questioned that conclusion. So I was curious as to whether there was going to be a follow-up presentation on some of the out years and the program beyond 5 years that the boards would be able to benefit from, because if it is a recurring expense, given all the other demands that the town has capital demands that the town is facing, I'm not sure that paving, reserving bond capital for paving makes sense. But again, I remain open-minded until we get all of the information, but I'm really asking about whether there's a plan for additional information before we need to decide.
So just to clarify, you're asking about the out years?
Yeah, to be specific, there was the focus of the presentation was about 55 miles out of 272. And to me, that seemed like the run rate would be about the same over the next 20 years. And if that's the case, it seemed to present a scenario that we're going to be looking at about $3.5 million of expense as a regular recurring item, and we're not necessarily catching up on anything.
So, Craig, you know, that slide that I gave to you on page 17, I believe it is. So it's, according to the paving analysis that was done, it's $4 million the first, right, in 23. 1.25 of that is coming from our ARPA that we put aside. That's then an assumption of $1 million in the operating budget. Then the next year, the paving consultant said 3.7 million, and then again 2,250,000 broken out with ARPA and operating, and then they proposed in 2025 3.5 million, then in 26 3.2, 2027 3.57, and then they said starting in 2028 that at 2 million going forward every year, we could keep our roads at a high level of maintenance and wouldn't have to do any catch up. We'd be right there. And that's why I assumed why people bought into, you know, purchasing and voting for this plan, so we could have an actual document that tells us, here's what you need to do every year to get to the place where all your roads are in really top shape. And then you're just maintaining your roads at 2 million. And so that's based on I'm not an expert in paving, that's their analysis, but that's what they said in the plan. I do know that Bucky said some of it could potentially change a little bit. So for example, the utility companies are still looking at our plan and they're gonna plug in some information with the paving consultant. So for example, if in this book, it said, you know, in their paving thing, it said, oh, they're gonna do these number of streets and this is how much it's gonna be. But then the utility company could come back and say, hey, you know what, we're putting a new pipe in there, we're doing this or whatever, and we're gonna pick up a lot of that cost. So it could be modified based on that, but I know that analysis is still going on and Bucky could speak more clearly about it. But just to be really clear, the paving consultant, you know, who did the assessment, lined up, and I put that in that PowerPoint presentation, and you also have that paving backup from the presentation we did on that. We'll be caught up by 2028. And some of the paving in the paving plan, if you recall, some of these were for, you know, big projects where they're going to last more than 20 years. And then you have some broken out into chip and seal, and, you know, so it's various degrees, but that is their plan to get our roads into full on, you know, really in good shape.
Mr. Curley, you have a follow-up?
Yep. Yeah, and thank you for that, Madam Selectwoman. That's helpful. I do recall that the consultant did mention that our roads were above average currently, so catch-up wasn't a concept that he was putting forward, but I understand what you've described, so thank you for that. Madam Chair, my next questions will be brief, and I know that we have a lot of people who want to ask questions, so I don't want to take up too much time, but these are more Parks and Rec. I don't know if Anthony Calabrese is on the line or available, but I see that Roger Ludlow Middle School turf is on the schedule for this year, which is great. I see that Sullivan Field is in for the following fiscal year, which I support, and I think that's great. I just wanted to ask questions about the items in the current upcoming fiscal year, even the smaller projects. So Lake Mohegan has a lot of repair work that needs to be done following the storm in the fall. There's some work, about $500,000 of work at for Dwight, the tennis courts at Dwight, lights at the Bubble, and upgrades at Jackie Darrell. I just wanted to get some color as to the timing on those items too, just to understand when that work might occur and what the timing might look like.
Sure. Can you hear me, Craig?
Yep. Thank you, Anthony.
Perfect. So Lake Mohegan beachfront restoration, obviously that work needs as soon as we can. So typically when we go for this thing, we get the bodies in February, when the RF check is working on now. With all hope to have the dredging portion of the restoration done prior to April 15th, when the fish start to spawn. That would also give us time to complete the restoration prior to opening for Memorial Day. So we are kind of crunched for time there. Obviously, this was one of these projects that was not on the waterfall chart. It's storm damage, and just the timing of it, it presented itself to be presented this way to the board. So that's why that project is before you. That quote, the estimate of pricing there is based on a quote. We reached out to some vendors that do that kind of work. We had one that submitted a pretty formal proposal to us, in the neighborhood of around $400,000, and then working with our engineering department, they estimated we probably need about another $100,000 or so for the design services. So that's where that estimate came from. It's only 2 months old or so. So fairly fair. I feel very confident with that estimate. The tennis center lighting upgrade, those lights were installed in 1989. We've added court since those lights were installed. The lights right now only cover 5 courts. We'd like to add 2 poles so we can cover the 6th. We do have those lights go out every year, whether it's ballast, lights need to be replaced, poles go out. They are definitely at the end of their useful life. I've presented this project probably 3 or 4 times, and cut 3 or 4 times, or kicked down the road 3 or 4 times. So hoping to get that one done. As for the timing, obviously, that's one of those ones that we are pretty much ready to go. We can retrofit the 5 the poles that are already there. So it shouldn't take. It's not a long project. The White Elementary School tennis courts. Those tennis courts are used by Ludlow High School for some of their JV stuff. Obviously, we do a lot of rec programming there, tennis lessons, that nature. I had this on the waterfall chart for a couple of years out. I was going to do Fairfield Woods first. Unfortunately, the Dwight courts have deteriorated faster than Fairfield Woods, so I just swapped them on the waterfall chart there. They're heavily used courts. We're looking to go post-tension, which is what we've been doing. We have more than 4 courts. We did both high schools recently. We get a 20-year guarantee out of those against cracking, 10 years on the line. So makes a lot of sense for us. Again, 2 different companies quote that project, and we're in that ballpark of 550, which is a little higher than what the Tomlinson project was at 400. And again, that ends up just being based on the topography of the land there. There's kind of a cliff, and the 4 courts aren't level. 2 of them are up above the other 2. So the Jackie Darrell Pavilion, this is another project that I've presented before. We're looking to do upgrades in the kitchen and the bathroom. This building was built in 1981 by the Public Works Department. It's a great building, great space. It'll be even more in demand when Kentfield Pavilion comes offline. So we'd like to upgrade those bathrooms, make them ADA compliant, obviously keeping within any FEMA guidelines that we'll need to. But it's a pretty straightforward project. We've walked that space several times with James Ryan from our building maintenance Public Works Department. And then the last project that I have is the large capital project for the turf field at Roger Ludlow Middle School. Again, this is something that I've had on the waterfall chart for several years. We're getting a lot of support from the local sports groups who would like to see this project to completion. Roger Ludlow Middle School has the youth groups, has the high school, has the middle school, so it gets a lot of use down there. We'd like to add lights to the turf there. There's already lights at the high school, so running lights here really makes sense. It would, we'd have additional field time. Fields wouldn't, be closed when it rains. Fields here do have some drainage issues, especially close to the wall near the car solar ports. That's the basic rundown of the Parks and Rec projects.
Thank you, Anthony. No further questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Curley. And thank you, Mr. Calabrese, for that information. Other questions from the board? Okay, Mr. Mottola.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for the presentation. Brenda, I appreciate your presentation. I was a little I guess not confused, but you said that in prior years this list was cut down before being presented to the boards. So my question is what is being presented tonight, is that what the administration wants to go forward with, or is it your intent to have a discussion with the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, and I guess also the RTM with respect to what projects we want to do, for example, the next fiscal year?
So, excuse me, John. Yes, the projects that we have for the next fiscal year are projects that we have prioritized. Projects
okay.
We, department heads have said that, that are crucial or important, things that we think are valuable and we want to get done. But again, as I said earlier, I feel like we could improve this process a bit by pulling together a bipartisan working group going forward. Because obviously, as I said, I wanted to lay it all out there, every single thing identified. And even things that, that I have talked about in the past. I think at the last Capital Workshop, if you remember, we focused a lot on Old Town Hall. Remember the pictures of the offices with the mushrooms growing out of the carpet, and the fact that the building, the structure has got like, it's big. I mean, it's got like beams holding up the floor. The building is literally sinking into the ground, and it's expensive. I'm assuming it's going to be quite expensive. So that's why we threw in the town hall addition, and that's for purposes of discussion. We had the buildings assessed. Bucky said that, an old building like Old Town Hall is like opening a can of worms. It could be very expensive to maintain it as a municipal building for government services. And, maybe we might want to have a discussion about potentially adding on to Independence Hall to bring all of our services into one place, and maybe applying for preservation grants through the state, which I've heard there's quite a bit of that available, and maybe turning that building into a, historically preserving it because it's an important building in our town, but maybe using it for, events or RTM meetings or Board of Finance meetings. That's just something I wanted to share with you, the boards, because it's something that I've been thinking about. Similar to the senior center, you see that I have it way far out in the waterfall or the planning document, assessment document, is because I don't think our senior center is in great shape. I mean, we have some upgrades we're doing to it, the roof, HVAC, bathroom. But, if you go Monroe, Shelton, Milford, towns surrounding us, their senior centers are really beautiful. And it's something, I think that we should think about. I don't know how we're ever going to get there. It's quite expensive. But these are discussions I think we should all be having, or at least thinking about.
Okay. All right. Have you, for next fiscal year, just it's probably going to be difficult to do everything on the town's list and the Board of Education's list. And I know the board hasn't presented yet, so I don't want to get into that. But have you seen, and you can answer this any way you want to, have you sat down with the Board of Ed yet and gone through an analysis comparing what they want to do and what the town would like to do for next fiscal year?
No.
Okay.
They just,
and I assume that's going to happen?
We just got there, we got it, when you got it, we got it. So yeah, we haven't had a chance to analyze it, and obviously we're all gonna have to talk about, the different, needs and how we're gonna balance those.
All right. Well, okay. All right. And then the other couple of questions, I have follow-up questions. I was going to ask this, but I think you answered it. But on the debt budget threshold, you have 8.45%. And are you telling us, and I know we're going to meet our financial individual in a week or so, I think at a future meeting, is that the recommendation from our financial advisors not to exceed that threshold?
Jared, do you wanna?
Our board of finance policy, I think, is 10%. Not saying we want to go there, but I just want to be clear where that number came from.
Hi, Mr. Mottola, everybody else.
Hey, Dick.
So it wasn't his recommendation. What we did last year when we started and when we set this threshold and put in place the bonding capacity, we looked at the previous year. So this is based on 21 and just built off of there. Just so you had that most recent year as a benchmark. We figured we would use that, and if you can look at it a number of different ways. Like I said, our financial advisor is not recommending this, but you could look at that in a couple of ways. If you want to say that the 10% is sort of a hard cap, and maybe the 8.45% is a soft cap. I guess you could look at it in that way. But our goal is to keep within the soft cap, the 8.45%, as we. And the reason for that is if we start deviating too much from that and increasing too much, it's an increase. It's going to be a spending increase like anything else, and we start, we start creating competition with other spending items, and so our goal is to try to keep it there.
So that was, and I'm not saying you're necessarily incorrect about that. I'm not questioning, but that is just something that, based on your analysis, you think that's the appropriate threshold.
So we think that, and everybody could have their own opinion on this. But
Sure.
You can have your own opinion about where you think the threshold should be. As far as the analysis that was done to get us there, the analysis was done by our financial advisor. But from our standpoint, we believe that that's a good level to try to shoot for and keep it around.
Okay. And I think, all right, our financial, it's Matt, I forget his last name. I guess he's coming before us in a week or two.
Yeah, Matt Spurno from Phoenix Advisors, okay. Yeah.
All right, and then I just have a few follow-up questions on other issues, Madam Chair, if that's okay, and I'll be done for now.
Go ahead, Mr. Mottola.
So, hey, Anthony, on the turf field at Ludlow and the turf field at Sullivan, I think you said the turf field number includes lights?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that one field you're going to put at Lower Ludlow, or is it going to be like a couple of fields?
So it's really like a field and a half. The tentative plan would be like a full-size multi-purpose field, football, lacrosse, soccer. It was I would say almost a 3/4 size practice area. You might be able to do some small-sided stuff on, but overlaid on both of them would also be a softball field. where you could play Little League, or the varsity team or JV softball can be played down there as well.
And over on Sullivan, is it your intent to do the football field and the adjacent soccer field to turf?
That's correct.
Okay. And you have on here some out years that lights down at Dugalio Field, the softball field. Whatever happened to that, you may not know. About a year or so ago, we had a presentation from the Fairfield Softball League that they wanted to partner with the town to help fund that. And we had some issues from a legal standpoint, at least some questions legally whether we could do that. I thought we were going to get some information on that, and it kind of disappeared, and we never heard any more. So can you tell me anything about that?
We're regrouping.
Okay, that's fine. I had a question about whether we could do it legally, and that's kind of why or some issues with that. So if your answer is we are regrouping, I'm assuming that the town wants to do this itself. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. It doesn't mean that the league wouldn't be involved with us, but like the Board of Finance had a lot of concerns, legal concerns. I want to make sure we have all that stuff ironed out before I come back with it.
Okay. All right. I'm fine for now. I guess I see Mr. Walsh. You may have a follow-up on that. I'm all done.
Mr. Walsh, do you have a okay. I wanted to get to Ms. Bastilli because she's been waving at me here. Mr. Walsh, though, do you have a follow-up with Mr. Matola's question, or do you have something else?
Madam Chairwoman, I'm just trying to follow up on Mr. Matola's question, so we don't have to keep coming back to things we've already talked about. So if you don't mind, but I'll wait too if you want me to bring it up.
Yeah, please do your follow-up, and then Ms. Bastilli can ask her question. Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Calabrese, in 23-24 for non-recurring capital, Mr. Matola brought up the Dugallo softball lights once again, which we kind of shot down last year for the $200,000. And now there's also, for that same year, driving range lights for $500,000. So it looks like in 23-24, we're going to be lighting that place up like it's its own city, kind of, because we got a lot of lights going on up in that area. And can you tell me what conversations you've had, if any, with the neighbors? Because we'd asked you to reach out to them last year.
Yep, that's where we are. That's the regrouping part. We're still working on all of that.
Have they been talked to yet?
Not all of them, no.
Some of them have?
I have talked to some, yeah. I've talked to some people that are supportive.
Like, how many neighbors would you estimate would have to be talked to? The whole street that goes up to that area, because you're going to be bringing up, obviously, a lot of traffic up there.
There's 12 neighbors.
12 neighbors?
That's it.
For the whole street?
Whole street.
Okay. How many have been spoken to?
Maybe one or two.
Okay. So, and what has been their reaction?
Supportive. You know, again, most people, I don't know how much turnover there's been in that neighborhood since we put the field in, but people I've spoken to that were opposed to the project originally because of traffic and whatnot have said they really haven't seen that. Never materialized. When it does materialize, it's one day a year. Sometimes it's the opening day when they have majority of the girls up there, and if the overflow lot in front of the front part of the property is not able to be used, then they park out on the street, and that's when the issue comes. So when they have the overflow, it's not normally an issue.
Okay. Can you talk about I don't want to, pursuant to Madam Chairwoman for us and also the First Select Woman, we not going to dive deep, but are you proposing that there's going to be lights up there 365 days a year, or maybe just slightly less than that? Maybe you'd close on Christmas or Labor Day or some other thing, but other than that, we'd be open for business up there with lights on most of the year?
For the driving range, yeah, I'd look at that as a large revenue opportunity, yes.
All right, that's all I have for right now. I guess we'll talk about it as we go through. And I'll have other further questions in regards to the plan. I just wanted to ask a couple questions in regards to those two items.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Ms. Pastilli?
Madam Chair, just a point of order are people from the RTM part of our meeting for tonight? Just so I'm clear, because this is a Board of Finance meeting, so I just
Yeah,
want to clarify who's participating.
yes, yes, they are. So, and thank you for asking that question, Mr.
But it's not on the agenda, just so you're aware.
Yeah, so what we've done historically and what's been done this evening is we've invited representatives. There are 4 representatives from the RTM who are actually participating in the meeting. So there were 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats that were sort of designated by their peers on the RTM to attend. This is something that typically we do. I do note that there are a significant number of other elected officials on the call, but for purposes of participating in the meeting, those RTM members have been designated to participate, and so yes, we will be taking questions from them.
I crashed it.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. Pastilli, go
Good
ahead.
to know. We can crash RTM meetings too, I'm sure. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, you can. You are ex officio, and you can be recognized and ask questions. So go ahead, Ms. Pastilli.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My question is for Bucky, and I don't know if this is the appropriate point to ask a question of him. It's
Yeah,
just
sure.
It's a general question about the purchase of trucks for DPW. Just because I noticed in like originally, like the original 21-22 projection from last year had 1.278 that we are expecting to spend on trucks. And then this year we have a capital expenditure that's a little less, that doesn't specify trucks, but instead trucks are more spread out, like on the, like on a yearly basis. And then there seem to be adjustments year by year, like there a set of adjustments in non-capital recurring in 26, 28, and 30, and then another set of adjustments in years 25, 27, 29. So I was just hoping that he could speak to that and just explain like the change in approach.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks.
Great. So last year we created the request and for 5 years, and we were approved for 3 years. And at that time, I talked about the lead time, and we have ordered, for instance, 7 snowplows, and we did that very quickly right after we got our approval last year, and we don't have a single one. These items are stalled at the border in Mexico. They're down in North Carolina. They're awaiting various components. So I said that last year. I knew this was going to happen. That's where we are. In terms of the out years, it's merely a reflection of what our fleet manager and our supervisors feel will be necessary in the out years. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so if we still continue to have supply problems, will we just like accrue to the next year until the equipment comes in, or?
Well, every one of those replacement units is replacing a unit that is in dire need of being replaced. So even though there's a lag, right now we're still limping along with what we had.
Okay, great. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Pastilli. Other questions? All right, Mr. Kuhn.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I think that this is probably for Jared initially, and it dovetails off of Mr. Matola's question regarding the 8.45% cap that Jared, I think, suggested that we want to live under, and that the Board of Finance has a 10% cap, debt service cap. Have we gotten guidance from bankers as to what that number is if we were really worried about losing the AAA rating?
There's no magic number, and nobody's going to say that there's that you need to keep it here, you need to keep it there. 10% is what you hear a lot from government entities as being a level that not to be exceeded. But it's not the only thing that the rating agencies are going to look at. But again, this is more of an issue of where were we when we first did this capacity analysis, and not wanting to move too far from that number, because it means that you're going to have to cut somewhere else. If you start increasing your debt service, then you're going to have to find other places to cut in the budget. And so it's really, to a certain extent, it's what's your philosophy and your view of where debt service should be in the context of the entire budget, and what's a priority for you. So, and I think anybody can have whatever opinion they want, but this is, like I said, we kind of pinned it to the most recent year at the time, which was about 8.45%.
Okay, so it's prudent management with some built-in slack in the event of we really get the 4 rate increases this year and need to issue some bonds. So, okay.
Madam Chairwoman, can I jump in for a minute on this?
Yeah, Mr. Flynn, I see you there.
Thank you.
If you have a follow-up here, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And I just wanted to address it from past history in the Board of Finance. We actually were specifically told by our financial advisors as well as our auditors to stay at that 10% or below number. Jared's absolutely right. When the bond rating agencies look at your AAA credit rating, they look at about, I believe the number was about 27 different metrics. And given all our other metrics, including our pension level, our OPEB level, our funding level, and let's not forget the weak financial position of the state of Connecticut and our location on the Sound, right, which causes for hurricanes and the like, that staying below that 10% was indeed very, very prudent and appropriate to maintain our AAA credit rating. And that was a specific conversation that was had several years ago when I was on the board. So thank you for the opportunity to address that.
No, I really appreciate that insight. And I guess maintaining a AAA is rather sacrosanct to the town.
Indeed.
The other question is a little bit more, I guess, broad and for the entire team. And as people have pieced together their capital wishes, have they also been tasked with trying to identify programs or technologies which would perhaps help to offset costs? For example, with some of the HVAC stuff at the schools, have they been tasked with looking at solar and some of the incentives related to that, especially after this this most recent infrastructure bill? Have they been looking at things like geothermal or other technologies? Like there's some technology I've been reading about where basically it's akin to creating an ice cube on top of the roof that melts during the day, and it's supposed to be very efficient. And there may be programs available. I know that on the solar side there are plenty available, and certainly I also came across something recently on paving that I guess there's a new thing of plastic paving, which is using recycled plastics as a way to be more environmentally sound. It's also supposed to have a longer life. I don't know if we're looking at any of these kinds of things or tasking the people who are putting together their capital wish list with, can you identify programs to offset some of this?
Yeah, it looks like Ms. Kupchak is walked up and is, are you going to address that, Brenda?
So, thank you. As far as the schools go, that's something you'll have to ask them about their plan and ways they've identified. Most of our stuff on this list, I don't know about the paving representative, about those different technologies. I couldn't speak to that. Bucky maybe could, but as far as our stuff, most of this is, you know, if you looked at the town facilities, it's ADA upgrades, life safety, things of that nature. I don't know specifically if you want to ask anything that's on our list.
No, I was thinking more philosophically. I mean, those are kind of small potatoes items comparatively, but things like the paving and the capital expenditures for the schools, sort of the HVAC, those are sort of big ticket items. And do we ask those who are asking to, because they're going to be closest to potentially to a lot of the alternative technologies, ideas, resources.
Yeah, Brenda.
Sure, Bucky, go ahead.
Yeah. So tomorrow there will be interviews being conducted with ESCOs, which are energy savings companies, by the Board of Ed and the town to hire a consultant to do just what you said.
Great.
To investigate energy savings and the like. In terms of asphalt from plastics, I have never been a big proponent of being an early adopter in those things. You know, I have to see it. I have to see it work. We have to look at the prospective savings and the longevity and the like. But I have not seen that in this state. So I'll keep my eye open for that.
Okay.
But I have not seen that occur yet.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kuhn, for those questions. Mr. Testani.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry. Just had a quick question for Anthony. Just curious on the reimbursement, or have you pursued, I'm guessing, reimbursement on some of the storm issues for like whatever happened to Lake Mohegan or some of the beach areas? I think we talked about it. I just kind of wanted to check back in with you on that.
Yeah, thank you for following up on that. We did meet with FEMA. They had some concerns. I don't know off the top of my head, so I apologize if the storm if it has been declared an emergency at the state level for municipalities.
I think it was, yeah. That's why I'm asking.
That was kind of what we were waiting on. And again, this one, it's just a matter of making sure that we're following every little detail that we need to follow in order to get that reimbursement. So.
And I know, again, we've talked about this before, but just as a reminder, you're pursuing any other like grants or opportunities for state funding for some of the projects you have outlined in your proposal. Is that fair to say?
Fair to say that the town does have I believe, a part-time grant coordinator now who does help us with all the grants.
From my days on helping to organize Trumbull Youth Lacrosse, that we pursued turf fields as you are now. And that was at the time for Trumbull High School. And we were able to get some grant consideration at the time for turf fields. I don't know if they still exist, but there was special funding opportunities, if you will, for turf fields. And having coached it both on regular grass and turf, I'm a big turf fan. So, but I was just curious if there's something we could pursue along those lines in terms of getting some additional reimbursement, maybe perhaps something for you or whoever you think to sort of check back into?
No, definitely things that we're looking at, and obviously I also try to talk to our state delegation and try to keep the pressure on them because there's also funding that can come from there. Town of Berlin is a great example. They just got a brand new turf field at their high school,
Right, that was funded, you mean?
fully funded by the
Yeah,
state.
and that's what I'm referring to. So there are opportunities like that out there, right? Exactly. All right, so as long as you're checking back into that, and on a positive note, as always, I think you're doing a phenomenal job. And I got my reminder from my beach sticker today, so it's good to think about when it's 15 degrees outside.
Thank
you.
Thanks, Anthony.
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Zastani, a lot of times that turf field, Anthony, may have been on a bonding list, the bond list, as opposed to a grant. So that's something that the delegation would have to lobby to get on the list. We've had funding for Operation Hope and similar things get on our bonding list, on the state's bonding list. So that's something the delegation would have to pursue on our behalf. And I know, I just want to note that the discussions with the athletic groups we've had over the last many months has been that we would work together in a public-private partnership to be able to fund those turf fields. So that's something we're also, for those of you who aren't aware of that, which would lower the cost of what we have put on there, listed on.
All right, thank you, Mr. Testani, and thank you, Ms. Kupchak, for that insight. Mr. Stark, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did.
Go ahead, please.
Might be a question for the CFO. It seems that our overall debt levels are reasonable, but I understand the impetus to keep debt service under 10% in any given year, maybe even under 8.5%. Have we got access to the bond markets in such a way that we could issue new debt not in level increments like we did last year with equal amounts due over the following 10 years? In other words, push some of the maturities further out or issue refunding bonds?
We do have the ability to issue refunding bonds, and our financial advisor and some others actually weigh in on this too and give us some guidance if it's appropriate, if the maturities and the rates are right and the market's right. There's obviously a cost to doing that. So the analysis is whether or not the cost of doing it, is gonna be worth the refunding. I think my recollection from last year was that there was one potential refunding opportunity, but it wasn't sufficient enough to warrant actually doing it. Okay. When we come around to issuing bonds this year, we'll revisit it and we'll talk to our financial advisor and see if that's a possibility again.
Madam Chairwoman, if I might help with a little bit of that.
Sure, Mr. Stark, are you done?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to
follow, but I'd love to hear from Mr. Flynn first.
All
yeah,
right.
thank you, and my apologies for jumping in. I didn't mean to do that.
No,
But,
it's fine.
yeah, we did do a substantial amount of refinancing of bonds over the last number of years through the prior administration and this administration, and took advantage of lots of opportunities, which actually allowed us to take some of those funds and put that into our surplus and the like, and actually fund some of the fill pile stuff, quite frankly, in the last 2 years, because we got some bonds, I want to use the word coupons, but I might be using the wrong word there. In addition, though, and one thing that in the past we've been very careful of is making sure that we were paying off bonds within the time frame and the life of the asset. That was something that, about 10 years ago we put in place because we had found numerous instances before that where we'd have 20-year bonds and we were paying for assets that had already been gone.
Right.
replaced. And so what we tried to do, we adopted that entire policy of trying to bond it as close to the useful life of the asset as we could as well. So to answer your question, absolutely, as Jared said, we're taking advantage of refinancing opportunities where we can save money, and we're staying within that analysis of useful life. So I hope that helps.
That's very helpful. Thank you. The only other thing I wanted to ask about, and I know this is covered by ARPA funding, but worth asking nonetheless, is there any update on what the Rooster River remediation project is going to look like, and when the shovels might hit the ground? That might be for the select woman.
So thank you, Mr. Stark. That is the phase one in the ARPA funding, and yes, we are currently, and obviously Bill Hurley could speak a lot more in detail about this as the engineer on this project, but we are currently awaiting permits for some of the, what are they called again? Retention basins throughout the project area. We're purchasing a piece of property on Villa Avenue that we're going to use. There's going to be a retention area near Tunstall Park, and then one up farther by the golf course on Old Stratfield. So it's a multi-level, but permitting is required. So we're in that phase right now.
Great, thanks. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Mr. Walsh, I think I saw your hand up before.
I was trying to follow up on Mr. Kuhn's question and Mr. Marsilio's response in regards to the solar. Mr. Marsilio, you said you're meeting with people tomorrow. What are we going to be doing in order to guarantee we are getting savings that we're being promised? Because there was a lot of these solar parking lot covers, I don't know what they call, big stanchions with solar panels on, both at the schools and both at right outside where our rec department is located and other places. And the previous deputy director promised us all these savings, but was allowing those savings to be calculated by the sales guy for the project, which turned out to be a complete failure. And, you know, I love solar projects. I think it's great. But I mean, if we're banking on saving, Mr. Marsilio, how are we going to, if we're going down this road, how are we going to confirm that we are actually getting savings and it's being audited and things like that?
Yeah, so you're right, Jim. That's a auditing issue. We have boxes of files that go back 10 years that memorialize whatever contract arrangements the town has with the solar providers. And quite frankly, no one has been able to dig into that since Ed left last July 1st and get the answer that you want. What I can tell you about solar, and I'm not the expert by any shot, if you start off wrong, you're going to end up wrong. So if you are getting a rate absent transmission, you're saving money. You understand that?
I think so.
Okay, you put a solar panel on your roof and it goes directly into your house. You use it, and whatever overflow goes back into the meter and you get a credit for that. But you have to negotiate the number that you're paying that's being generated by the solar panel. I've seen spreadsheets that Ed developed. Some look like much, much better deals than others. We do have an energy consultant that helps us in our bulk purchase regionally. All of our towns that are contiguous to us. We confer with him frequently, and he has advised us that to this point, there's no major losers it's the Wild West out there with people supplying solar. But that is an area that probably requires more investigation, but it's a big job.
Mr. Marcelli, I'm just telling you, I'm just one Board of Finance member. When this comes before us the next time, just what I will be expecting to see. It would be nice for the town to get a contractor, like maybe it is the energy consultant you already have, who looks at the plan and can give us an opinion in writing on whether we agree with the savings or what that person thinks the savings are going to be, so that when we're making a decision, we're making an educated decision, because we've gotten burned so far. And it would just be nice to have somebody who's not a salesperson for the company supplying this stuff.
Yeah. So I'm not going to agree that we've gotten burned, because I have seen the reports and they indicate to me that there has been savings, but I can't say that with total confidence. So we have a consultant. He's a Fairfield resident. He's a well respected man in the industry, and we will. I'll begin to insert him into this process shortly.
Okay. When do we think that audit's going to be completed on all those projects to see whether we're making money, losing money, or getting what we bargained for?
So I'm not an auditor. I pave roads, and I think that's more of a financial analysis that has to occur. I could put together the data, but someone's going to have to crunch those numbers.
Okay, so that's like our internal auditor or someone?
Well, someone. You could outsource it. You could just get someone else to look at it. I mean, they're pretty busy up there.
Darrell, I saw you stepped up. Do you have anything to add to this issue?
Mr. Walsh, I do. Connie has done an audit, and it's under review right now. So I guess I'll leave it at that. But I can tell you that one part of it, one of the recommendations, is to look more closely at the the history of the whatever the subject is that we're looking to convert to solar, and look at what the rates have been over a period of I believe it's 3 years, and use that as a basis going forward. Obviously, there's we can't base everything on what's happened in the past. We need to look forward too, and that's what the consultant would be for, because they're going to have a much better understanding of what the market looks like in the future.
Yeah, from what I understood, there's people who predict that stuff with pretty good accuracy on what future costs look like, what direction it's going to be going. So obviously that would have to weigh heavily into that analysis at the time we decide to do it.
Definitely.
All right. We look forward to hearing our audit. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have no more questions in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And I just want to add in, I appreciate Mr. Schmidt said that internal audit has done something that's under review. I also recall when she came before us about a year ago that she had completed an audit and presented some recommendations to the town that were reported to us at that time on this very subject. And there were, she had gone back and done an analysis of the savings versus what we thought we were going to get at the beginning from, I don't remember which solar contract it was, but I do know that there were a series of policy recommendations made at the time that audit was issued about a year ago. So hopefully those are considered and in place before we move on to anything else. So thank you again for the question. Ms. Kubchik, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up. So that was something that Tom Bremer took the lead on when we first came in here and met quite a bit with Mr. Bowman, and Connie on our own, just trying to analyze all that information, because as we all knew, there was a lot of reports that we were achieving some serious savings, and then Mr. Bremer wanted to look a little bit more closely into that, and that's when we sort of uncovered that maybe we weren't getting the amount of savings that we thought. And so that was sort of the beginning of that process. But obviously, I think it has helped us in a way that Mr. Schmidt was just mentioning, that going forward, we're doing a much more careful analysis of any transfers to solar to make sure that it is reaping the benefits that we think, and we know exactly how we're getting there or what we're getting.
Thank you, Ms. Kupchak. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Bateson.
Hi, thank you, Lori. Quick thing. A lot of this stuff that I'm seeing on the spreadsheet is relatively familiar. There's one thing that I see, the townwide facility upgrades as a result of the audit. I understand, I'm not familiar with the audit. I haven't seen the report. If Jared or somebody could circulate it to us, that would be great. I don't recall ever seeing it. But there's significant dollars in this, and I understand, approaching it over a 10-year basis. I just think there's a role in the way we're financing this that the Board of Finance should take a look at. And the simple fact that when I saw Brenda's presentation, the flavor of what's in there seemed to be a boiler, piping upgrades and stuff like that. And I think there's something that needs to be looked at by the Board of Finance, that if this is, let's say we have $2 million coming up next year for this, if this is a multitude of small projects spread over different buildings, I just think that the Board of Finance should look at this and make sure that this meets the bonding requirements, so that they can't be split apart and separate, and they should be under maintenance. I just want to make sure that we're sticking to the bonding policy, because I recall being on the board that was something we'd like to adhere to. So going forward, I'd like to see the plan and just, maybe ask the Board of Finance to take a deeper dive into it when this stuff actually comes before the board, that what's in there meets the group requirements and shouldn't be in the operating under maintenance. I get what we're doing, but I just want to make sure we're satisfying our rules. That's all I have on that.
So thanks, Ed. We put that plan together because when Bucky came on, we realized we didn't have a full assessment of all of our buildings, just like it's having an important planning document. What are our building needs? Not what do we want to do with the building in the future and all that other stuff, but what are the basic needs? Boilers, piping, life safety, ADA, that kind of thing. And so obviously we just wanted to list all those things because that report was very extensive. And I'm sorry if you didn't get a copy of it. I was fairly sure we sent copies to everybody, and you may have gotten it a backup. But Bucky or our staff can make sure that you get another copy of it. But any bonding item that we would eventually bring forward to the town bodies, we would never bring it up unless it met the criteria beforehand of the bonding policies.
Okay, thanks.
That's just breaking out all of the different things that were identified in that report.
I get it, and I understand that. I understand what we're doing. I just, I just want to make sure that, when we're approaching things over several facilities, grouping it all together and putting it under, I just want to make sure that, all that stuff is what it should be under bonding.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Bateson. I actually appreciate that question. And I think the report, Ms. Kupchak, you may be right. The report may have been sent out. I don't think we've ever gotten a presentation on it. And it may be helpful to Mr. Bateson's point to perhaps put that on a future agenda before a bonding vote comes up on any of these things, just so that the board can, understand what's in there. So we can talk about that offline, but I think it's a good suggestion. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Walsh.
All right, I've got a couple of areas of questions. In regards to the senior center, putting a new senior center in for $20 million, what starts concerning me is, like, in this coming year, we're putting $850,000 into the senior center. And then we're considering building one for $20 million. I mean, the question comes up is if we're going to make the decision to do that and commit to it, why do the $850,000?
So I think I mentioned this earlier. What we voted on with the ARPA money for the senior center, if you remember, it was for bathroom upgrades, because they're the same bathrooms they were when that school was an actual school. It's actually embarrassing. And some kitchen upgrade, and then there was some roof work and new HVAC. So my thought process, and you know, this hasn't been fully formulated, but just being here for the last 2 years, I thought, and just seeing these other town senior centers, wanted to just throw that on the list so that elected members knew there was something I was thinking about. I don't know that we could potentially do it. And even if we were to do it, if say in the next whatever many years we had the funds to be able to build a state-of-the-art senior center for our seniors in our town, that building that we use now for the senior center can be utilized in so many ways. And those upgrades that we're using the ARPA funding for would not go to waste. So it would still be a building we could use just with those basic upgrades.
I will say I agree with the use of the money for those bathrooms. That has been an embarrassment for this town for many years. And it is about time that they got respectful bathrooms, and especially people who are elderly and have a hard time moving around as it is, to be using children's bathrooms that were designed for the size of small children. It was kind of disgrace. But I will tell you that the more money we put into the current senior center, hopefully improving it, the less likely I'm going to be to probably say we need a new one if we keep making it nicer. So that's the reason I was asking, because it just seems as though, proper investments being made into it this coming year for the bathrooms, but in 5 years, I don't know what our role is with that building, but it could be wasted if we are not going to use that building for anything. But, I guess we'll see what happens. I think this board, I did see you putting in the bonding, right, for bonding for the pavement. Is that correct? In future years?
For the paving?
Yes.
Yeah, so what we put in here for discussion purposes, hold on, I'm going to grab my glasses. So it was the way we laid it out. Let me just pull it. So as I said earlier, this was based on that analysis that was done by the paving consultant.
Yes.
And, when we talked about this, when we appropriated the money, that we really wanted a comprehensive list of our paving needs, and not something that was sort of done on the back of an envelope, but more by a professional regarding how do we get there, how would we get to a really comprehensive paving program. And so we took the information in that paving report, the way he lays it out, and the need. So according to the paving report, we would spend in 23, 4 million, 24, 3.7, 25, 3.5, 26, 3.2, and 27, 3. And then starting in 2028, based on that report, we would only have to spend $2 million a year to keep level maintenance of our roads. And so we thought, okay, we took the information from the paving report, we threw in the 1.25 million, which is the 2.5 we voted to put in from the ARPA funding toward paving in each of those fiscal years. And then with the assumption of $1 million being in the operating budget And that's what sort of calculated that to give the board, you know, just an idea of where we might be and where we could go based on the paving report, you know, recommendations and what we could potentially do.
I guess my concern as we go forward, and just to keep in mind, and maybe this board has to have a comprehensive, our board, the Board of Finance, has to have a comprehensive conversation about it, is because we normally decide how things are funded, whether it goes into the budget, whether it goes for bonding, to approve all bonding. Is paving going to be an operating expense, or is paving going to be a capital expense that we bond? And I've always been of the mindset personally, and I thought our board was, I mean, I know there's been a change in the board, so maybe it's worth having that conversation again, was that it was an operating expense. Because my thought is we pay for paving, other than catch-up. I want to make sure I'm keeping, if we need to do catch-up, I'm all for possibly catching up with bonding. But in regards to the amount that we pay for paving on a yearly basis, I fully believe personally that should be an operating expense. Because if it's not an operating expense, then we are basically paying for, we bond it every year. We're basically paying for that paving, and we're paying interest on it because we're going to be doing paving every single year. And if we're going to follow a plan, and I like the plan that's being rolled out, and I could not compliment the administration or Mr. Marsilio more for getting that plan done. But if we're going to do it, I think we got to come to a resolution soon, because it's going to be in upcoming budgets, on how, as a town, we're going to pay for that. Because, you know, say it's a 20-year bond, we're going to be paying a coupon on that every year, right? On that bond. Pretty soon, you're going to have 20 coupons for the 20 years. And really, it's just paying the principal, and now you're paying interest on it, which to me makes no sense. I know other communities do it, and I always scratch my head when that comes up. It seems like a complete waste of money. And this issue, I learned very early on, 20 years ago, when I first got involved on the RTM, by, you know, our member Mary LeClaire's husband, Brian LeClaire, because we used to do the same thing for police cars, except it was a shorter period. We did 3-year bonds for police cars. And Brian LeClaire raised up, why are we doing this? Because at the end of the 3 years, we're basically, every year we're buying the same amount of police cars, and we're just bonding them for 3 years. So why wouldn't we expense them every year, pay the same amount, and just not pay the interest every year? And it's just a very simple way of looking at it. I mean, the problem becomes if you bond it every year, that just moves it out of Mr. Marsilio's budget amount. There's no paving in his account anymore. What it just raises up every year is the debt service cost just goes up. It's principal and interest. So I think to kind of help with this capital plan going forward, we should have a defined time where we discuss this issue and try to come to resolution on it. I thought we had resolved it. I know the administration's still considering it, but I think as a town, we've got to decide, is it an operating expense or a capital expense, and move forward with it. I think it costs us just more in interest. It's the same amount of paving that properly we should be doing. But I will say, I want to reiterate, if we need catch up because we fell behind and weren't properly budgeting and there has been years in previous administrations, and I think even Board of Finance members, including myself, maybe cutting, like during the pandemic, cutting paving. If we need to do catch up, let's do catch up and then get on a defined paving plan. And I don't mind if we need to bond to catch up. I just don't want to bond on the what I consider to be an operating expense on our yearly amount that we should be spending. So I'm just going to raise it.
I appreciate that. And so I hear what you're saying, and what that, I think we even had this conversation before we had the paving plan finished, but we did need catch-up paving, and that's why we put some of that ARPA money toward it. But then when we got the paving plan from the consultant, it showed that we even had more catch-up. And according to that document, there are roads built into that are 20-plus year paving projects where they dig the whole thing up. It's very involved. And according to Bucky, he knows a lot more and can speak more intelligently about it than I can. But some of the paving is a 20-plus year that you get life out of that, and some of it's less. And so based on the paving program consulting report, that's why we built it in, because perfectly honest, I mean, those are big numbers, Jim, right? I mean, you're looking at 4 million, 3 million, you know, that's huge, and that would spike taxes. And, you know, so, but according to the paving plan, it would be a mix, right? So you would get there in 2028 if you did that level according to his recommendations, 4,375,353,2,3, and then at 2028 in the report it says we get to 2 million. And to me, that's a more reasonable number that we could all, I think, agree to put in an operating budget that doesn't, you know, spike taxes. But yes, most of that is catch up and to get us to that level playing field going forward in, according to the report, 2028. But I hear what you're saying.
Okay. Maybe we need to have, I would just like to follow up on that. And maybe we do need to have a conversation about it. I mean, these projects where they have to dig down all the way down, they're going to continue to happen forever. It's just certain roads are going to come up in a given year that are that old or that.
I think Bucky he's really good at explaining this process. You know, he's done this in a lot of other towns. I don't know, Bucky, do you want to speak to the difference between the big jobs as opposed to the chip seal? And
we've had that before.
Yeah, can we just, I'm just going to jump in for a moment because I know that there's a couple of other members that have follow-up comments to Mr. Walsh's, but I think, you know, I'll just state for the record, I personally agree with Mr. Walsh. I reluctantly supported the ARPA money for paving on the basis that that was a catch-up and that we wouldn't be doing more of that. I think that this is a conversation we should have because it's a big topic. And I think as part of the conversation, we should look at our historical paving numbers, which have varied up to and above 3 million a year in the past. I see what we have in the analysis is a combination of ARPA and bonding that's getting us down to 1 million in the operating budget, which is, you know, a fairly low number. So I think this is a broader conversation that we have to have. And I think it could be, it's probably a topic that extends, you know, beyond what we want to have time for tonight. But I do very much appreciate the suggestion that we have this as a separate agenda item, not the road plan, which we have seen, but how we finance it, because I understand the pressure on the budget, but we don't save money by putting paving on a credit card. And I am personally not in favor of doing that. I think Mr. Flynn, did you have a comment that you wanted to make on this? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Number one, I completely agree with Mr. Walsh, and I think he sized up the issue appropriately. Number two, what we had done in the past, because, you know, a number of years ago, going back maybe a decade or more, the town did have a program of bonding paving, and the town bodies, in fact, I think it was actually the RTM that led the charge at the time, and Mr. Walsh might have been on there at the time, had led the efforts to move it away from bonding and into the operating budget. And what we did was a phased approach. So much like the administration is talking about, there was a catch-up adjustment, and then just for illustrative purposes, in this instance, we'd go from $1 million 1 year to 1.2 to 1.4 to 1.6, and gradually increase that amount to the fully funded amount, so that we wouldn't do the tax bite out of the taxpayers and a large increase in the operating budget all at one time. And in fact, by putting it in the operating budget, it is actually cheaper over the long term of putting it in the credit card. One last item on this, and it goes back to something that Mr. Curley said, because I do remember the follow-up, because I had the same level of concern. That $2 million number that's being quoted in the out years, I don't know the backup behind that. I do know that that's substantially below the numbers that we had been quoted previously by past DPW management. Now, I granted, you got to take that with a grain of salt, and I get it. But if you look at the run rate of how we're at 4 million or 3.5 million, how it goes all the way down to half that, okay, in a period where there's going to be cost of living adjustments, and we're talking 5 years out. I don't know how that works. That, you know, I'm from the show me state as it relates to that, and I'd just like that $2 million number to understand why that's the right number in the as the baseline in the out years. So I appreciate the time. I encourage you guys to have your meeting. I know where I stand on this issue based on past practice. So thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
You're muted, Ms. Charlton.
Lorian, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Mr. Walsh, I don't know if you were done, but I think Mr. DeWitt has a follow-up on this specific point you were making. So I'd like to let him just jump in here if that's okay. Mr. DeWitt?
I was done with this paving because I know it's a bigger subject, and I agree with you. It needs to be covered another night, but I'm glad we are talking about it and look forward to working with the administration.
Yes, thank you for raising it. Mr. DeWitt, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sorry for the background noise. If you're getting a lot, please let me know. You know, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Flynn have articulated this very well. I just wanted to lend my support. You know, I was on the board when in 2011, after 3 years of weaning us off of bonding, we went to a full, we went to a full paving in the operating budget. And at that time, Richard White, who was our DPW director, had a really comprehensive plan in place. So again, I don't want to belabor it, but I absolutely support what both Mr. Walsh and Mr. Flynn were saying.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Other questions from the board? Ms. Pastilli.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I had a couple of additional questions. This one perhaps might be for Jared, but honestly, I'm not sure who it's for. So if you don't mind, I'll just ask. I noticed that the South Benson pump station, that there were some adjustments in the the pages that followed all of the year by year analyses. And so we had one case where there is, in the end, like there's a net adjustment of 9 million, like where perhaps I did screenshots of these and I took the headers off the tops of the columns. So I apologize. But it looks like there's one case where we're expending 6 million, but expecting a reimbursement of 15 million. And so we net 9. And I know that this is part of a bigger picture, but I was hoping perhaps he could shed some light on, I mean, this is a huge project, right? Just shed a little light on why these adjustments are here.
Well, if Bill Hurley is not here, I could tell you what I've gleaned about that project. And it's such a large project that the hope is that there will be federal money available to do that. That's about all I can share with you. It's contemplated to be something that's in line with the Army Corps of Engineers notions of what should happen down at the beach. And it's Bill's project, and it's going to hopefully have the support of the federal and state agencies that will make the project be able to come real.
Okay, great, thank you. And then just one other question that I happened to see. There was a project for the Commerce Drive Bridge that looked like it was removed from the 2020-21 report to this year's report. Like I was trying to follow, like what stayed and what might have dropped off. Do we know why that one dropped off?
Commerce Drive?
Yeah, Commerce Drive Bridge
Yes,
project.
there's the requirement for some land acquisition at the Land Rover dealership. That is,
Oh, right. I remember this. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I'm sorry. I forgot about that. And then my only other question is, are we expecting, this is a really general question. Again, I'm not sure who this is for, but are we expecting an additional, like more infrastructure money from the federal government now? Do we have any direction on that?
I can tell you what the rumor is. The rumor is that the state of Connecticut is going to get a $10 billion, and it's going to be up to them to allocate that through their local and regional planning agencies. That hasn't been voted on yet, as you know. And there will be some infrastructure package, and all of the money is not spoken for. So some of these projects are in the budget and really contemplate having that support.
Okay, great. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bastilli. Mr. Curley.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have two quick questions or follow-ups, one related to DPW and one related to Parks and Rec. Regarding DPW, I just had a question about how certain projects get prioritized. And for example, I believe in the non-recurring capital under $1 million for 23-24, the first item on the list was sidewalks for Southport and Stratfield. I may have misread it, but I think I saw that on the 22-23 list in last year's waterfall. And I understand that the administration has to go through a process of prioritizing. And I just wanted to ask about how that prioritization occurs and if that those sidewalks actually did get moved out a year, and what the thoughts were there.
Yeah, I could tell you this. On the Stratfield, the Four Corners project, there was a grant that the town received, like $900,000. Then the scope expanded, taking sidewalks up Stratfield Road to Owen Fish. And when the bids came in, they exceeded the grant. So that's the request for that. So you probably saw the project when it was requesting the grant. And now this is the town's contribution to complete what the scope was agreed to be. And I believe the same is in Southport.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that. And then on the recreation Parks and Rec side, Anthony, I just wanted to clarify for my benefit and for the benefit of everyone on the call. You've got two turf projects in here, which I applaud, and some of the other smaller projects you've taken us through already. But I also know that Parks and Rec has started their master parks plan. That work is underway, and I just wanted to confirm with you that work is not reflected in this waterfall. That work is ongoing. Will wrap up later this year, and then will potentially be a part of the waterfall capital plan waterfall work that occurs next fall. Is that your expectation?
Yeah, that is my expectation. There's no projects currently reflected in here that are coming from the master plan. Like you said, we do expect that master plan to be wrapped up hopefully June, July of this year, and from there, I will then, at our next capital planning workshop, most likely, hopefully later this year, be adding projects to it. As you only going out, 4 or 5 years here. I'd like to go out about 10, so we see everything on the horizon that's coming.
That's helpful. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was clear that that work is coming down the road. So thank you for that. Madam Chair, no further questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Curley. Okay, it's almost 9 o'clock here, and I know our Board of Education representatives have been waiting patiently. Does anybody have any further questions on the town materials? I see Mr. Walsh. Go ahead.
Sorry, Ms. Chairwoman. I was trying to get to my other questions before, but paving took up a little bit of time, so and then we moved on. So
Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a couple of small wrap-up kind of question areas for the administration before hopefully we can move on to Board of Education. And one of them, I guess, is a generalized question, and maybe I'll wait until after the Board of Ed's done. But my concern is that this plan that's before us is kind of like a wish list, okay? And it's not really a more definitive plan of where we have prioritized, whether it be the first selectman's office, the Board of Selectmen, and on us. But I think at some point we should have something a little bit more definitive on what the plan seems to be, knowing that it might adjust every year. Because the plan, at least on the town side, obviously, and the administration has been very clear with their documentation that they're not advocating that all this stuff gets done. It just is putting a bunch of things that we know about on it. But clearly, some of the backup, we know that that would take us above 10%, which has always been, you know, as Mr. Flynn said, I've heard numerous reports from our financial people that we should not go, like that's a hard line in the sand that we should not go over. But I think, and you know, maybe this is a quick question to Brenda, because maybe this is the 5-year plan you're talking about. Are you talking about the 5-year plan being this committee that you're talking about being a more definitive plan? Like what's really going to happen over the next 5 years? Or
right. So what I said earlier was I felt like, you know, we could improve this process that the town has undergone for a number of years in a way that is a bit more productive, in my opinion. So I would like to establish a working group from the Board of Finance and RTM and put together a more firm 5-year capital plan with, you know, sort of similar to what we did on the Board of Ed when I was on it, where we established a facilities committee and we met for a period of time and we took all the input and information and then we prioritized and laid it all out. And then, then the boards voted to sort of like agree with that. And then we knew that was our plan. Yes, can it change? Can things come up? Like Anthony said, you know, we have a problem. But, you know, just a firmer plan. And I would like to lead that up and establish that so that, you know, maybe possibly after this budget cycle and those discussions that you were saying earlier, you know, you're talking about paving, talking about, you know, the needs from the schools and all the different things here on the list. Now we try to lay it out in a way that coincides with what the department head said, you know, I need this or this should be done, and sort of, you know, we have flooding issues in town and infrastructure problems, you know, certain things are more crucial than others. But I think that it would be a good thing to do after our budget season to establish that committee and put together a plan so that we could have something that we are all, you know, all understanding this is what we're going to be shooting for and doing over the next 5 years.
Okay. Moving on from that, this is more a comment just that I saw in the non-recurring capital plan that's listed. I understand why in 21 and 22, or what would be considered fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, that the non-recurring capital amounts are higher because we're getting ARPA money towards a lot of those projects, which then reduces the net amounts down to 3.4 and 3.5 million dollars. I'm not saying we're definitely going to do all that, but regardless, I understand those numbers. I'm a little concerned in fiscal year 24, which is this 23/24 year, on the town side at least, when we don't have the ARPA money, and it now goes up to a $5 million amount that year, because that seems to be a lot larger than we've ever come to doing non-recurring. So it's just more of a comment. We could talk about it. It's not worth talking about tonight any further. It's just something I just noticed, because then the non-recurring goes back down to more like normal levels, and maybe we could spread that out, or we could figure something out. It's just more of a concern I just saw when I was there. And then this is a question to you, Ms. Persler, is the ARPA projects. I understand their supply chain and we're competing with all sorts of stuff. I presume then that what that means is at a certain point, if we know we can't get this stuff done in time, you're going to have to reallocate some of that money to do other things if we know we can't get some of this stuff done, correct?
So we're not there yet,
Yeah,
Mr.
no, I
Walsh.
understand.
You know,
Yeah.
we have that, we do have time.
Yes. Yep.
You know, according to the federal guidelines, and who knows, you know, the feds may extend it based on their knowledge of the supply chain issue. But again, we're not worried yet. I'm sure we'll get to that point at some point, but right now we're still optimistic that we'll be able to, within the deadline guidelines of the feds, establish.
That, Madam Chairwoman, I have no more questions in regards to the town side. If we can go on to the main event, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And before we move on, I just want to thank all of the Board of Finance and RTM members for your questions. I think this was a really productive discussion, and the Board of Selectmen. I didn't forget you, Mr. Flynn. Couple things just to do a roundup of some of the things we talked about for my notes. We did talk about on a future agenda to discuss the townwide facilities plan review. So I'll follow up with Mr. Schmidt on that. We did talk about having allotting time in a future meeting to have a discussion about paving and the financing of paving specifically. We had a number of questions about bonding capacity and the 8.45% and where that comes from, and you know how that affects you know, not only our credit rating, but let's all recognize that it affects our future budgets, right? Increases in that percentage translate into tax increases. So I do want to you know, let everyone know that we are planning in our February meeting to have our financial advisor come before us and give us an overview of you know, the town's financial condition, similar to what they typically do, review the benchmarking of the town of Fairfield compared to other municipalities, and talk to us about the important factors that they look at. Fill pile, we will have a meeting. We have a joint meeting scheduled next week. I think there were some important questions raised about the fill pile, and notably, you know, given the significant level of uncertainty around that, is it or is it not realistic that we will be, you know, bonding that in the next 6 months, and that it sort of belongs in the short-term capital plan? So we'll talk more about that after we hear the fill pile update next week. And lastly, I appreciate Ms. Kupchik's suggestion to look at and revisit this whole process of capital planning with the working group. You know, I'll just, my pet peeve is I wish the town of Fairfield had a capital budget process in our charter, like many other towns and cities do. And, you know, this has been a substitute for that in the absence of a capital budget. But I think, and I give much credit to those who have, you know, created this process along the way, but obviously it can be approved in the interim of anything else happening. So thank you for that suggestion. And I'm sure you'll have Board of Finance members that are eager to help on that. So again, thank you. And if it's okay with everyone else, I would like to, on that note, move on to the Board of Ed presentation. And I don't know if it's Mr. Papageorge or Mr. Cummings would like to take us through an overview of what they've got, but I'll turn it over to you.
Ms. Charlton, I'm going to kick it off for the Board of Ed. I'm joined tonight by my fellow Board of Ed member, Mr. Peterson, who is the Board of Finance liaison and the chair of the Finance Committee and has been very involved in this process. Mr. Papageorge, our Director of Operations, as well as the Superintendent. Mr. Papageorge will take you through the waterfall, but just to give the Board a little bit of a reminder where we were. The Board of Education approved our waterfall on September 28th. We were prepared for when we thought that we were going to be meeting on September 29th. So we moved forward, really did a lot of this work back in August and September. At that time, the waterfall that was approved really for presentation. And as was mentioned, this is a living document and it does change as new information and new projects are identified. But the board did vote just on what was going to be presented at what we thought was the September 29th Capital Waterfall. At that meeting, the waterfall that was presented fell in line with past waterfalls in terms of allocations per year that fell beneath the 10%, fell within the bonding policy of the town. At that meeting, the board had a discussion about wanting to fast track the HVAC improvements in our schools. The waterfall was forwarded to the town with a notification that we were going to be looking at what it would cost for, instead of doing the improvements over 10 years, doing it over 5 years, and the waterfall was updated. That was the waterfall that the town used to compile the list that is before you tonight. The waterfall also changed in its format from years past. The district worked with Colliers to have a more interactive waterfall. So it will look a little bit different, but the information that was on past waterfalls is still contained in this waterfall. You may also recall one capital project has already been approved this fiscal year. The Roger Ludlow Middle School roof project was approved earlier in the year. We were concerned about supply chain issues, so I thank the board for moving that forward. Right now, the priority of the waterfall for the past 10 years or so had been on primarily building renovations. We are now coming to a point where Holland Hill is complete. Roger Sherman has been completed over the last year. Mill Hill is due to be completed next year. And our focus, as you may recall from last year, has switched to improving our existing infrastructure, HVAC, improving our heating systems, improving our building maintenance systems, and improving safety and security, which always is a priority. You may recall the district 2 budget cycles ago, and thanks to the town's support, funded a consultant to come in and do a building assessment of all of our buildings. You know, for years we've talked about bringing air conditioning to our schools, but we never really had a firm handle on what that would actually cost. That assessment was completed over this last year, and those figures are now worked into the waterfall. Rather than having the improvement of the HVAC listed with each individual school, we pulled those projects out to be district-wide priorities, and they will be listed separately. HVAC really is the focus of the board. We're concerned about air quality. It's not a question in years past. You know, the heat of the buildings was a concern. It still is, but right now, over the last 2 years especially, we are learning how important mechanical means of fresh air is, ventilation, air circulation within our buildings for the health and safety of our students, and also for the health of the building itself in terms of managing humidity within the buildings. We know that could potentially add to mold, which just adds to increased costs. Both of these things were big impetuses in us in moving the project forward and trying to shorten the timeline to get the HVAC improvements completed. We also felt that by moving it, doing it sooner rather than later, the cost would be reduced. It went from approximately $100 million over a 10-year period to about $75 million. If my memory is correct, Mr. Papageorge, you can correct me in the presentation. So there would be a savings doing it sooner rather than later, and also potentially saving in some repairs that we've been facing with just aging systems. So that is where we are. at this point in time, we're very happy to be sitting down and meeting with you. We do understand, the varied needs of the town. While it's fun going last, it is helpful just to hear the other projects that are before you. We do appreciate that we are all one town, and that decisions have to be made. And with that, I'm going to, give it to Mr. Peterson to see if he has anything to add that I left out. We had a late meeting last night, so I very possibly could be forgetting something.
Not at all. That's very comprehensive. I appreciate your introduction. The one thing that I would say about air conditioning and mechanical means of fresh air, in addition to everything that you've mentioned, is that as many of you know, our buildings were not designed to have their windows and doors closed all the time, which unfortunately the current state of security requires us to do. So we have multiple buildings that are in need of this for a variety of reasons, but also because the means that they were designed to be cooled by is obsolete because of security considerations. So, all of these considerations, workplace issues, indoor air quality, ventilation for health and safety, those are all major priorities for us that come back down to one large, we recognize a series of appropriations, but it's something that we have found a lot of agreement on our board about with staff, with district leadership. And we're very dedicated to trying to push this forward with your help and guidance. So thanks.
And this has also been responsive just to the community's needs that we've heard just from our parents and other town officials, appreciating concerns around the health and safety of our students, and also, as I said, the infrastructure of our town buildings. So we appreciate that we are stewards of these facilities, and look forward to the discussion. With that, I think I'll hand it off to Mr. Cummings. I don't know if you have anything to add before we give it to Mr. Papa George.
Good evening, everyone. No, I would turn this right over to Mr. Papa George.
Okay. Mr. Papa George, first of all, Ms. Vitale, Mr. Peterson, thank you very much for that overview. Really helpful to understand and set the stage in terms of how your board developed its priorities for this waterfall. Mr. Papa George, if you could, as you're moving along, we have a very large package of backups. So I think, as you walk through, I don't know what your plans are for walking through this, but if you could just make sure to help us as you move along so that everyone can follow these documents if that's your plan, is to walk through them. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I first would like to apologize. The PDF that was sent out, and we're working out some of the bugs on it. You received, it was approximately 600 pages, but it's not truly 600 pages. There's a lot of blank pages in there that as Ms. Vitale mentioned, we did change the format of the waterfall. We're trying to make it more interactive. There's currently on the Board of Ed website now, the waterfall is found there, and there's hyperlinks in there that can bring you to breakdown on specific projects. But somewhere along the line in there, a bug was discovered, and we have a ton of blank pages with blank projects in there. So I believe the intent was to assign project numbers ahead of time so that when new project came in, it would be easy to implement. But I don't know exactly why they translated into the PDF that was sent out. So we're working on cleaning that up, and we'll be happy to send out a new copy once that happens. For tonight's purpose and discussion, I would think, as Ms. Vitale gave a very good overview, our waterfall is basically focused on safety, security, and indoor air quality and mechanical means of fresh air. There is no large changes from let me take that back. There's no large project changes from last year's presentation to this year's presentation. However, there is a large significant difference because of the air conditioning projects. Last year, we were approximately $3 million ask. This year, we're approximately almost $20 million ask because of the air conditioning projects that were added for the next 3 years. That being said, the focus here is the projects for this year. As you can see, they're all either indoor air or safety or security related actually for the next 3 to 4 years. For instance, this year we're talking about the Burr boilers, which is a heating issue. McKinley's roof design, we already got approval for. Thank you. Roger Sherman's roof design, we have approval for already. Thank you for that one. The Roger Ludlow Middle School roof replacement, which we just received notice today. We will be going from the state that we will be cleared to go out to bid. So we will be moving that forwards. The Fitz House, so it's Ward's Fitz House units. Those are indoor, those are heating and cooling systems that are on the roof. They've aged out. They were again broken out over the next few years, but we had pulled them in as a single project for some cost savings there. Additionally, the only other one that's for this year that's on there that would be new is the Fairfield Ludlow High School elevator. We had that elevator go down right at the start of school, and it was down for, unfortunately, almost a month and a half due to the age of the elevator and the availability of the equipment needed to operate it. So that's why we were looking to do a modernization there. Unfortunately, that elevator services a lower part of the building, and without the elevator, any one that is unable to use the stairs would actually have to go outside the building and around and down the driveway to get to the lower area of the building. So that's why you'll see that in there. But I know it's getting late for you guys, and I don't want to drag out and out. I'd rather give you time for questions. But again, if you look at next year's focus, again, they're safety, security, indoor air quality, or heating concerns. When I first came into this position, we really focused on getting a major driver of anything that used to come up as emergencies, such as boiler replacements, roof replacements, that type of stuff. We wanted to get them into the waterfall so it was a more comprehensive, and we weren't coming to you with emergency situations. So that was our focus. Our other focus was also to be a good fiscal neighbor to the town and try to reduce our ask, which we had done. As I mentioned, we were down to approximately $3 million for this year and $3.5 million for next year, and approximately $11 million for the year after, until this air conditioning project came up, which we identified as the indoor air quality and felt that it was necessary to fast track it onto the waterfall as soon as possible. The only big other changes out there, as Ms. Vitale mentioned, is we do have 2 buildings that have not received renovations and additions, and that would be Dwight and Jennings School. So you will see those a few years out from now. Other than those, they're still kind of in the phasing and the planning status. So we left them on there as placeholders, but we will concede that those numbers are adjustable, but we'd rather be slightly higher and adjust down than have a surprise when it comes to the time for the planning for those. I don't know if you would like me to go, I can go down through the years, but again, most of the projects were already identified last year as new ones on there or moved from year to year. We didn't really do that much moving over this last year. So I'd be happy to turn it over for questions, or if you'd like me to continue on, I can do that as well.
Yeah, I think, can I just, maybe we could just focus on, if you could just answer a broad question relating to next year, and then I'll open it up to the board. So I think what we've got here is we're showing roughly 20 million is the ask for next year. And out of that amount, 14.6 million is the air conditioning at, let's see, Tomlinson and Woods, right?
Correct.
So I guess my question is,
I'm sorry, and Walter Fitzgerald.
And Walter Fitzgerald, Tomlinson Woods. So the air conditioning at those locations is 14.6 million of the 20 million. Can you just help us understand on this schedule, where does the ARPA money fit into that? And is this before reimbursements, the 20 million?
It is before reimbursements. We've in the past practice, we've put the entire bonded amount on the waterfall because, as you know, the reimbursements could be 5, 6, almost 10 years down the road. So right. As past practice, we bond the full amount, and then when the reimbursements come in, they're used to pay towards the bonded amount. That does not reflect the $1 million ARPA money that the town has offered in that 14 million. So it would reduce it by $1 million. Again, with us not being aware of when it was going to be available or what. So we wanted to make sure we weren't holding the project up to figure out where bonding was. So obviously, when we give it to the town, if they are ready to pay off the $1 million or contribute the $1 million from ARPA, then we wouldn't bond the full 14. We would reduce that amount.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to, I don't know if anybody else on the board wants Mr. Papageorge to walk through the years, but I was thinking of just opening it up for Q&A. Mr. Mottola, do you have a comment? I'm sorry, before I get to you, Ms. Vitale, did you want to say something?
I do, and I apologize for making it sound like we were done with all of our building renovations, because we clearly are not. We still have Dwight and Jennings. Right now, in terms of the board's immediate focus, we are so focused on just trying to bring the HVAC systems up, up to, I don't know what the right even word is.
Snuff.
Snuff. Modernization for some of them. And we also appreciate that in terms of our projections right now, the pandemic has kind of thrown everyone for a loop. And in terms of the housing market, we're seeing some positive trends with that. We're seeing some areas of town that we thought were seeing a decline in enrollment, possibly seeing increases in enrollment. So the district will be reaching out to a consultant to help us get new 10-year projections over the next couple of months, just to get a better idea if there's been any change in enrollment at our elementary schools when we're looking at Dwight and Jennings in particular. So as Mr. Papageorge says, the work is ongoing on that. We're going to be, the board is going to be looking to reinstating the facilities committee in some form to kind of take up where Ms. Kupchak and Mr. Mottola years ago were on those committees for the Board of Ed, and formulated that waterfall that had all of the building renovations on there. And we're going to realize that the next 10 years is coming up, and we need to kind of continue with that and get some more definitive answers into those last two school buildings. Sorry for not mentioning at the beginning.
Do you mind if I jump back in for the air conditioning projects for 1 minute?
Of course.
Just real quick, I know we keep referring to them as the air conditioning projects for the schools, but I just want to make sure it's understood that when we talk about air conditioning, we're talking about adding air conditioning to the buildings, but because of the study we did last year, we have a full and better understanding of what that will entail. So adding air conditioning to a building could mean replacing electrical switchgear depending on age and condition of it, increasing electrical switchgear capabilities if the building currently does not have that. Also in that number, it includes the controls upgrade so that we're running an efficient building, basically with a computerized system. So we have control and we can hopefully see some savings with that control. Additionally, the thoughts behind these numbers also included by doing that much work in a building, if there's currently a sprinkler system in the building, fire suppression system, we may need to do some modifications to that. Additionally, by running air conditioning and dropping ceilings and that type of stuff, we've identified areas where we could add sprinkler systems during this project because it made sense to do as part of the air conditioning project. And additionally, with dropping the ceilings, if we do have some buildings that currently do not have LED lighting in them, it wouldn't make sense to drop lights and then put back up the old lights when we can put up new LED energy efficient lighting. So it's the air conditioning project, but it's a full encompassing project. I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Thank you, Mr. Papageorge. Appreciate that detail. Mr. Mottola, I think you were going to ask a question before we jump back. So go ahead, please.
Sure, thanks. And so just looking at the document for the air conditioning, if I'm reading this correctly, over the 3-year period, the total cost is around $75 million, but it looks like with reimbursements from the state, the total cost of the town will be $58 million, around there. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. And Ms. Vitale, did you mention at the beginning of your comments that your waterfall plan has been done since about September?
Yeah, we,
Okay.
this was done at the end of September because we just, as you may recall, it was supposed to happen in September, this meeting, and then it got pushed to November. So we've, we've been, nothing's really changed for us in terms of that. We had this information and been ready to go, and just really waiting for the timing for you guys.
Okay. I think this needs to get done, and maybe if it's over 3 years or maybe 4 years or 5 years, I think you need to figure out how to do this, and there needs to be a meeting with the administration, and you need to get into a room with an understanding of what you would like to do and what the town needs are, and we need to figure this out. And I'm not sure if that's the Board of Finance's purview. I mean, we vote on it, but it's got to go through that process first. And I'm hoping that there's going to be some kind of reasonable, rational agreement between the town side and the Board of Ed side on how we can get this done. And maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 4 years, maybe it's 5 years. I don't have a lot of questions on it. I see what you've done here. Nothing's really changed on this, but for the air conditioning. So I guess those are my comments. Thank you.
Can I follow up real quick? I'm sorry. I just want to say that, I don't know if you're familiar or not, but the Board of Ed did charge me with doing a 5-year plan. We presented it on the waterfall as a 3-year plan. Reason being is that we wanted to be able to ask for the money for each stage of the project in front of the actual project. So we had the funding available for planning and getting things moving to keep the project moving. We do fully intend that this will take 5 years, even though we are asking for the funding over 3. It may not be necessary to bond in the specific year of it or bonding part of it throughout the 3 years until we get to the 5-year mark. We just wanted to make sure there was a full picture out there and that nothing would stop us from moving this project forwards.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Papageorge. And I'm going to take a question from Mr. Flynn, but I just want a quick follow-up, Mr. Mottola's comment. Thank you, John, for raising that question. I was also confused as before we heard that we had just gotten this information yesterday, and I agree, we need to have a collaboration between the town and the Board of Ed to figure this out and prioritize it. But to what Mr. Papageorge just said, I think that needs to be clarified as well, because I understand the desire to get approval in advance. But if this is going to take 5 years and the capital outlay is going to take 5 years, these are big dollars, and it does have a somewhat dramatic impact on the bonding that, this flows into the bonding schedule right now, and it's producing numbers that are causing spikes that are, I think, raising everyone's eyebrows. And I think what you're telling us is that you would ask for an approval here, but given that we typically bond when we're spending the money, it doesn't sound like the capital outflow would be over 3 years. It would be over a 5-year period. Did I hear that right?
That is correct. Again, our intent was to ask for the money up front due to the supply chain and the delays and delivery and stuff. We wouldn't want to have to come to you for bonding on something that was all of a sudden available and that we could move forwards with. We would hope that we would already be in the approval phase so that we would just work with the town to bond it at the appropriate time.
Okay, and thank you for clarifying that. But again, I think that's something we probably should get more clarity on as you come back and ask for these approvals, because it does, with projects of this size, I think what you're telling us is that the way this is flowing into the waterfall is not how it would really flow in, and these are sizable enough to make a real difference there. So thank you. Mr. Flynn, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Charlton. And first of all, I want to agree with Mr. Mottola and Mrs. Charlton and the way we just laid that out. What we need is a meeting of the minds and a realistic look at what the next 5 years look like relative to these large projects. Look, we need some compromise. We've got a situation here, just to provide some context. We've got the fill pile remediation that we have no choice but to spend the money and get that resolved. And we need to do that short term. I understand the prioritization of the Board of Education relative to air quality, and that I get it. And we're going to need those two. It's kind of like the proverbial what is it, the rat going through the snake or whatever, where we're trying to put too much through at one time and we're causing this blip in financing. And let's fully appreciate the fact that what's been presented before us is over $400 million of quote unquote needs assessment here across the town in the next 10 years. And that's really not doable from a bonding perspective. So we need greater clarity, at least in the short term, on what this timing request looks like, what the alternative funding sources are, what the net cost is actually going to be. And we need to model this out to understand what is actually affordable and what's not affordable in the short term. So I thank you for the time, and I thank you for the opportunity to apply.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Chairman. Chris DeWitt. Quick question, and maybe this is a timing thing, but I'm a little confused. I thought we bought Walter Fitzgerald campus last year. Why is there a $5 million bill in the 21-22 fiscal year?
21-22, that was the purchase. You look, that was last year.
So this happened after June. This happened after June 30th so it happened in 2021. So we've already spent that money.
Correct.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. I kept thinking that this was an expense that we hadn't paid already. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just to follow up, Mr. DeWitt, I think we typically do our bonds annually around the July timeframe, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. So if I recall, the last bond issuance, which was July 21, had that purchase in it. So
yeah, I do remember that now, and you know, not to go off topic too much here, but boy, I would love, before we get into the budget, to hear how Walter Fitzgerald campus is doing and how it's generating tons and tons of revenue, as Mr. Mancusi had promised to us.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Curley, did you have your hand up?
I did. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly agree that if the capital expenditures are going to be spread over 5 years, that's how we have to lay it out for bonding purposes as well. But I also do appreciate the dilemma of wanting to have that funding approved and available timely, because what we've seen since COVID started is that construction costs are escalating faster than inflation. So I get it. But I guess my question relates to the three big ticket items, the 14.6, the 28.5, the 31.8. Just more generally, two questions. One, how did the board prioritize which schools went in which year, first, second, or third in these groups? And then secondly, just want to confirm that that for those projects that are in year 2 or year 3, that you have taken into consideration some type of higher inflation factor than 2 or 2.5%, because we know that construction costs are escalating at a higher rate, and want to make sure that we're not caught short.
Sure. Just to answer that, the first year we looked at when we prioritized the years was Tomlinson, Walter Fitzgerald, and Woods, because those schools are already air conditioned by quite a bit. So this would be kind of the finishing out those buildings. And then we moved on to the ones that have some air conditioning, but would need more extensive work done to them based on, as you know, the supply chain and everything. We figured we're hoping that it will start improving down the road more, because these buildings would need more mechanical equipment and more hopefully more availability as the years move on. I'm sorry, I hope that answered that. And your second part about the inflation, I just looked when you were saying that, I do not have the number in front of me, and I apologize for that. But we did work with the state, we worked with our in-house construction manager, and we worked with DTC to come up with an inflation rate that we felt comfortable with based on the current trends right now. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
That's fine, as long as it's not zero, I think.
Oh, no, not by any means.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bateson, did you had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Quick thing, I remember reading several months ago the headline in the newspaper about the air conditioning and the dollar amount. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, I was a little freaked out at the time when I read that number. And I'm a little freaked out when I see it in the budget. I understand the board, this is where you want to go. I don't know how I feel about it yet, but I got to tell you, I've been doing this for decades. I remember back in the day when we were trying to reopen Ludlow. And since that day, we dedicated hundreds of millions of dollars to facilities, to basically BOE facilities, to get them up to grade in code and provide a quality environment. And I get that. And over these years, there's been several townside projects that have always fallen by the wayside. And, you know, I guess I'm just expressing my frustration to the board and the fact that every year it just seems like more and more and more. And, you know, I'm looking at Old Town Hall. I had to go in there the other day to pay my taxes, and I'm like tripping over the portico to get into the building. And I'm like, how long are we going to put this off? So I want the board to understand that there's going to be a level of frustration on my part that I've been delaying certain town projects, and there are competing needs for money in this town when it comes to this. And I've been waiting for a long time to dedicate some taxpayer money to town facilities. So, and I know what's going to happen when this comes before me. My email is going to light up and I'm going to get 500 emails for air condition the schools. No one's going to say anything about town hall. And, you know, I want you to, you know, throttle back a little bit. I mean, you know, you're giving me a break, finance it over 5 years as opposed to 3. That doesn't make me feel any better. This is $75 million. I understand. I mean, my daughter's at Ward. I know what the conditions are like. I mean, I'm not crying about it, but, you know, guys, we're going to be competing against this, and I really need to start diverting some financial resources to the town side. That's that. I'm not looking for a reply. I just wanted to get that out there. Angela, on your spreadsheet, I noticed something else that caught my eye. 2 things that I just want, if you could follow up on. The Dwight number freaked me out. I mean, I don't ever remember seeing a dollar number for Dwight School at $51 million. Am I reading that right?
No, you are reading that correct. With
what happened?
What happened there is
Age.
The age of the building, and we actually were able to. One of the things I wanted to do when I first came in here was put true numbers into the waterfall, and we actually met with some engineers and some designers. We walked the building. We looked at infrastructure. We looked at piping. We looked at the basic construction of the building. And a part of that number 2, just so you know, is that I don't know if you're aware or not, but Dwight is currently on a septic system. So we worked with the town to come up with a number if we were to bring the sewer system up to Dwight, so that we could do that. And that could go down slightly with neighbors buying into going onto the system as well. But we've had a number of issues over and over and over again over the years with the septic system on a commercial building way up there. So that's why we did include that number in estimating this cost.
Okay, so you feel better about this number? Well, I don't feel better. You feel better?
I feel better about this number than anything we've had on there before. I feel that paints a true picture. And I know it was a sticker shock for a lot. And I don't want to say that's what I was going for, but what I was going for is a realistic number so that when this project does come up, I don't have to sit before you and say the number we've had on there you've been looking at for the last 3 or 4 years is under what it really needs to be.
Okay, did you do this same exercise for Jennings?
We did it for Jennings, but Jennings is there's a lot less that needs to happen to that building. For instance, size-wise currently, and this is again why it's ongoing, and we're working on getting new enrollment projections, because currently that building would need more of a makeover and some additional space, but not a large blowout, go out all the way and up. They currently have one portable classroom there that we would look to replace, but that's again why we're looking at enrollment numbers. But that was based on the information we had at the time when we did do that.
Okay, last thing. I noticed in all the material you provided, Mill Hill, maybe not the time or place for it, but I'm trying to read your spreadsheet. Is everything all right at Mill Hill? I'm reading that it's over budget. That's what I'm getting out of one document, but I don't know if that's correct. I haven't been following this project, but in looking at your thing, I'm like, well, it looks like there's a $2 million difference.
No, I will have to go back and look at that. As far as I'm aware, we are not over budget. I believe there's actually money still in the contingency that has not been spent.
Okay, there's fine. There was a contingency number there, and that's probably what I was reading wrong. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bateson. Ms. Pastilli.
Thanks, Madam Chairwoman. So I had Mr. Bateson actually covered a couple of my questions. To follow up on what Mr. DeWitt had asked, Mr. Papa George, do you mind just giving us like a really quick update on where we're at with Walter Fitzgerald? Like, are we all moved in there and everything?
Well, we are all moved into Walter Fitzgerald. There was a little bit of construction delay because of materials, because we purchased some sinks and hard surface countertops for the science classroom to make it more of a traditional classroom. But over the holiday break, those were all installed and are now operational. The art room actually now has running water in as well. So I think we're in very good shape there at this point.
Okay, great. And then when we had the HVAC analysis done, like, you know, when we're looking at indoor air quality, we're also looking at like mold prevention, right? Like, is that included in the whole thing?
Absolutely. The movement of air will prevent the mold.
Okay, great. And then are there any other items, like, are there any other items that haven't been included, like in what's been provided that might need to be included at a later date? I mean, like, what's on the waterfall right now is really what we expect to happen, right? Not within the confines of the yearly allotment to, you know, bond to debt service.
No, absolutely not. We wanted to give a true picture of the S. And again, we did a comprehensive look at it last year and looked at what was we looked at it and we said, what is missing from here, and what we went back through the history as well, and we said, what are emergencies that have popped up over the years that weren't on the waterfall and that we can kind of predict and put onto the moving forwards waterfall. And that's where you'll see boiler replacements and some rooftop units. So we believe at this point it is as comprehensive as we can be.
Great, thanks a lot. Oh,
Can I have a disclaimer there? That we just in terms of pipes behind the walls.
Absolutely.
We cannot see. We just had a sewer pipe at Ludlow that we're doing repairs on that, you know, we didn't know that it was going to break, but it did, and obviously it needs to be addressed. So that would be the one disclaimer for additional ads coming onto this waterfall in the future. There is still an unknown. These are not new buildings. I appreciate the concerns about other town buildings, but I hope that everyone just realizes that these buildings that we're talking about, we're sending over 9,000 children into every day, or over 7 hours a day. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pastilli and Mr. Papageorge and Ms. Vitale. Other questions? Ms., I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Ruggiero?
That was pretty good. It's Ruggiero, Amy Ruggiero, RTM District 1. Just a quick question. As we're rolling out, if we go forward with the air conditioning over the next 3 years, do we know what the impact is to the electrical costs for the town? And would that be part of the operating budget?
That it would be covered under the operating budget, and we are working with a consultant now that can help us get a better understanding of what the increased cost would be to electrical.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Walsh, are you waving or? Couldn't tell. Oh.
Hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I was putting my hand up to be called on. Sorry about that. This $50 million for how many students are there? Is it like 255 students?
I'm sorry, you cut out. I don't know.
How many students are at Dwight right now? Is it 255?
Let me see if I can pull that up quickly. I don't have that number directly in front of me.
I believe it's slightly more than that. I think Mr. Walsh, it's about 280 in that area.
What's the capacity for that school?
Mr. Papa George, do you have that one? I think that's close.
It's a 378 capacity.
78. Do we really need to do Dwight? Can't those students with the capacity we have in other schools be moved around and redistricted so that we wouldn't have to spend $50 million?
If I could jump in here on that point, Jeff Peterson for the board. This is actually a topic that we have discussed at a kind of very high level as a possibility that, you know, if we're going to spend this amount of money on renovating this building, shouldn't we also just have a broader discussion about the utilization of the space? We have not gone into any detail on that point, but this is a question that may come before the board, especially once we have, as Ms. Vitale said earlier, updated 10-year projections. So that is a possible scenario that we have made no decisions on, but we are trying to look at a variety of scenarios with that space for that exact reason.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, because it does seem like the numbers of students is going down. Spending $50 million on a building that's really at a capacity that is low and other schools are low. It just doesn't seem right, because I think I heard tonight that after reimbursement, the cost of this air conditioning would be about $50 million, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, because one thing is definitely clear to me is that there's no possibility we can do all these projects. The number of projects that the Board of Ed has put on their list has gone up by 185%. Am I correct? From last year to this year.
I believe the first select woman said 183%.
Okay, 183. Maybe she rounded, I'll say 182. It's still dramatic. And I understand that it's regards to the air conditioning. And I'm not saying that the air conditioner shouldn't be prioritized. That's for the board, obviously, to make the decision. But I do know one thing: if you are going to prioritize that, things on that list have to come off, and you guys will have to prioritize that. That's number one. Number two is that there's no possibility that we can do this over 3 years at that kind of number. We are definitely, I can speak for only me as a member. I am not going over 10% in bonding. It is just not happening. Ever. I'll vote against it. So Something's going to have to give. I think that if you want to prioritize, it's going to have to be over a longer period of time. You will have to take other projects off like you always do. Like when you decide to prioritize other projects, you move things around. Well, $50 million will save you a lot of money if you can try to get Dwight closed, I guess, before we have to spend any money there. But, you know, something's going to have to give. I appreciate all the comments that have been made by many about, you know, having meetings about it or whatever. But clearly the numbers as they are in here. And I will say this from both the town side and the Board of Ed side. I think this may have been one of the first meetings where we had one of these capital meetings where it shows a projection of going over 10%. It was always like we'd move things around so that it would be under 10% every year. But for some reason, this year, for both the town side and Board of Ed side, we're putting in numbers that take it over 10% and no one seems to care as much this year for some reason. We'd always move things around, taken things off or whatever. And, you know, I think we're still know that we're going to have to be under 10%. And how that's going to happen, I guess, will involve a lot of meetings. We're not going to solve that tonight. But I think at the Board of Ed level, at the board level, hard decisions are going to have to be made. And maybe that this, I think Mr. Bateson used the word throttling back. That's, I guess, a good term. The board's going to have to throttle back or remove projects or priorities if the sole biggest thing the board wants to do is air conditioning. I would understand that. I don't try to get involved in your prioritization. That's within your realm, and you guys have a hard time doing it already. And I know it's a tough thing because there's always more projects than money. But we do need to do the town side projects. We do need to do Board of Ed projects. And how we're going to get there is going to hit the candor, Mr. Peterson, in regards to that you might have to look at maybe closing to the other places. And that would, I know that involves a very difficult redistricting. Least of which is your board, actually, because you get all the heat for it. So, but, you know, my other thing that scares me is if these numbers are even 5% off on the air conditioning, on Jennings, on Dwight, it even gets more exaggerated. I mean, because the numbers are just so large. A 5% change will dramatically change everything even more. So I guess I'm with everybody else. We don't have a lot of time tonight. I appreciate you putting everything potentially on your list, what I call a wish list. And I also understand the sensitivity and the need for air conditioning. I do. But I guess I just wasn't prepared when these things were being circulated that we would be just putting so much stuff on that we'd be going over the 10%. I said to the first select woman earlier, I think we need to get some realistic numbers down. Like these are wish lists now. That's what they've become. Before it was kind of a capital plan. Now we've just put every possible thing on that we want, and we need to at some point now work these things out and figure out what projects we just cannot afford or will have to be delayed or whatever. I guess that's where the rubber meets the road to keep us under 10%. So I appreciate all the hard work you guys have done on this project. There's obviously a lot more hard work left. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I think, you know, it just bears repeating. Ms. Kupchak did make some comments about the process. I think while it is, the way the process has been conducted, while it's useful to understand the universe, this is, on a long-term basis, this is not as useful if we have everything here without regard to the overall financial impact. And I think, you know, at least what makes me feel better is look, we're going to be voting on this 1 year at a time. So I'm focused on 2022, 2023 personally, because so many things can happen after that. Ms. Vitale made reference to, changing enrollment in the district. I mean, God knows what can happen in the future. So I think, the process of, A, turning this into a real capital plan, and B, collaborating between the town and the Board of Ed to get to something that's mutually agreeable, things we've discussed before, are the things that need to happen. So I think we all understand that. Ms. Vitale, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
I wanted to thank Mr. Walsh for his comments, because for the board, we do view this as a workshop. We appreciate that these are large investments the town is making, and value the feedback and input from the Board of Finance, the First Selectwoman, the Board of, all town bodies, and the RTM. We felt we have a responsibility to tell you where we see our priorities are and bring them to you. I appreciate that you might have other priorities in terms of maintaining our bond rating, which I absolutely appreciate. Mr. Walsh, I hear you about taking things off, and one thing did come off in the last 2 years. There was more work that was going to be done at Sherman, adding a stage, making that gym bigger. We appreciated that that was something that would be nice to have, but there are ways around that. That came off the waterfall as we were putting things on. But some things, the boiler goes, we have to replace the boiler. An elevator in a school, when we have students that are in wheelchairs, we can't have children in wheelchairs going outside in the middle of winter to get to the cafeteria. Safety and security, I don't think these are things are nice to have. These are things that we need for our buildings, and I think that our taxpayers expect, especially those that have children in the schools. This is what's continues to bring people to Fairfield right now. We had a surplus, I think, in part because of our real estate conveyance taxes. If I'm wrong on that, for just the real estate market kind of booming these last 2 years, despite everything that's going on. And I think that we need to appreciate the role that the schools continue to play in attracting people to our town. You've said it before, it's good for business. Families spend money here, they eat here, they dine here, they make it an attractive place to live and to play. So that's my spiel. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Vitale. Appreciate your comments. Other comments and questions? Ms. Bastilli.
I had a more macro question. On the projections, like because of the huge turnover that we've had in town in the last, post-pandemic period, like you can tell by looking on Moms at Fairfield and on Fairfield Shares that there's like a ton of new families with about to be school-age kids that have just entered. So do our projections somehow take into account this huge influx of people that have just moved up, like from the city? Or is this before, you know what I mean? Is our data like pre-pandemic projections?
If I could answer that, this is something that we are working on right now. Ms. Vitale mentioned it earlier. We are going ahead and contracting with a demographic consultant that we've worked with for many years to produce a new 10-year set of 10-year projections. We had actually received our last up-to-date projections, I believe, in February 2020. So, when we were looking at a lot of this work that we are starting to take up now, as we kind of hopefully ease out of COVID, at least, fingers crossed. But we realized, seeing the facts on the ground, and again, everyone, as you say, looking around town has seen a lot of changes. We need to get a better handle on those demographic trends, and so we will be getting a new set of 10-year demographic projections for exactly the purpose that you just mentioned.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, intuitively, it just seems like there's a huge hustle and bustle with younger people that have
I know,
moved
but
to town.
from planning purposes, we need to quantify that, which
Yeah,
is your point.
yeah.
So.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that.
And also for the last projections that we had, in terms of closing a school, at that time, in order to close Dwight, Mill Hill had to be built to a 504. That was the data we had at that time. It was built to a slightly smaller school, so I don't want to make any assumptions that we have room for all of the children that we're projected to have. So we're looking forward to getting some updated projections on that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pastilli. Other questions from the board? I don't see any hands up. Could it be? Okay, going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's comments, appreciate the presentation from our Board of Ed and central office representatives. I think, you know, one of the key takeaways here again was that the point that was made about collaboration between the town and the Board of Ed to prioritize where we go forward and how we fit our overall spending into the confines of our debt service policy. And the other thing, again, I want to mention is again, given the size of these projects, we really do need to address the timing differences between the approval requests here and the actual waterfall. Right now, the model is very simplistic and it just assumes that, you know, when you approve it, we bond that same year. That's not how things are going to happen on some of these larger projects. And, you know, when we're looking at tipping the upper limits of our, potentially tipping the upper limits or even higher limits in our debt service policy, that does matter. So I think that has to be a to-do. If there are no other questions, we'll wrap up with the Board of Ed here. And again, thank you very much for all the hard work and for pulling this all together. All right. Next on the agenda item was to hear and consider any communications. Do we have anything from the town? Mr. Schmidt, Ms. Kupchak?
Nope.
No. All right. Then I will move on to the last agenda item and take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Walsh, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. All in favor? All right. Thanks again. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.